Thank you to the people that were responsible for bringing Mr. Nardi Cyrus from DEC to give us a presentation, since we had spoken about last meeting with respect to NRIs, and obviously that takes a lot of ground swelling and there's a momentum there, and there's other things that we could potentially do in the absence of funding and applications and whatnot, so I think this will be very helpful. So whenever you're ready, sir, I thank you for coming.
Oh yeah, okay, no problem. Well, again, yeah, my name is Nate Nardi Cyrus. I work with the Hudson River Estuary Program, which is based out of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Are you all familiar with the Estuary Program to some degree? I'll go over that a little bit for those who aren't. But yeah, my role there is the Conservation and Land Use Specialist. So I work with a counterpart that deals in Region 4, which is kind of Columbia County up toward the Capital District, that area, and I focus on municipalities, Kingston, Red Hook, so Ulster, Dutchess, southward to the city. As far as the estuary program, it's kind of a unique non-regulatory program of the DEC, so there's the part of the DEC that does the stream regulation and mines and pesticides and all of that. Our program is done through a partnership with Cornell University. I'm technically a Cornell employee on contract with the state, and we work to achieve these key benefits that I won't go into all of them, but some programs you might be familiar with are the Trees for Tribs program. That's my colleague Beth Ressler. We also do environmental education at several of the DEC facilities that are up closer to New Paltz, where my office is. We also deal with kind of the river stuff. I don't know if you heard about that 14-foot sturgeon that they caught, yes. Or they were able to sonar it from up in Hyde Park, kind of right by the president's house there, but considered one of like the largest that they've known to see in that area. Yeah, so that's through our program as well. So it's a really broad, encompassing program that looks to enable and empower municipalities and private landowners to not only improve the river, but the estuary watershed, that feeds that river, of which, Newcastle, there's no technical estuary or Hudson River shoreline, right? It kind of comes to that point there and right before, but anyway. So, in my work with, I focus on land use decision makers. So that does include land trusts, but for the most part in municipalities, it's conservation boards and advisory councils. We also work a little bit with planning boards and zoning boards for just general education on biodiversity and natural resources benefits. But in our work with municipalities, we focus on this basic mantra here as far as how a conservation board or council should move forward with projects. And the first one we have here is this identify what you have, right? That's going to be the basis of all the other work that you're able to do, because once you bring together all that information, then you can use it to prioritize is in the next step, and then once you prioritize, you can start to implement plans and practices that that are informed by science, right? That's the end goal here. So in essence, that's what a natural resources inventory is, right? It's a compilation and description of natural resources in an area, so it can be done for a municipality, it can be done for a watershed, a county. It's really just the bringing together of existing information, and that includes, for the most part, maps are like the most salient kind of piece of that, right? So you have maps that are looking at different attributes, and then there's an associated report that kind of interprets those maps so that this map right here, if you had no context for, it's pretty busy and complex and dense. So it's really just a map or a series of maps and then a report that describes those. And it's really driven by what the community wants. I do a lot of work specifically on natural resources inventories and assisting communities with that. And often I'll be approached and it's like, well, what should we put in here? And we're happy to assist in that. We work a lot with different communities that have put different things in their natural resources inventories, and we're happy to share that information. But really this is a document that should be assisting your community with kind of your unique set of situations and circumstances, to help you plan and incorporate natural resources better into your municipal government. So I try to include as many examples of different maps, just so that you can get kind of like an introduction to the types of information that these NRIs look at. So this is a project that we're working on in Montgomery. That's in Orange County. Just to the east of this, that's off-site, is the city of Newburgh. So that's where we are in this area. So this is a series of maps that were done for them. This is glacial outwash and alluvial deposits. So these generally go into things like topography and geology. Sometimes these are a little dense and people don't necessarily have a background in geology, but information is important for planning. So we have that. Again, I have a steep slopes map here. I'm not sure if you have a steep slopes ordinance here.
Yeah.
So this is really, you know, you can see the categories here, you know, 8 to 10 or 15, 15 to 20. You know, you can kind of cater that to what your ordinance says. I'm not sure what it says, but if it's like slopes in excess of 20, that'll give you a really good idea of the areas that are going to be regulated by that. So it can really fit specifically into your local environmental regulation in that way. Here we have wetlands and hydric soils. I know that you have an environmental review board and probably your own set of wetland maps, but this is a good place to hold them. These are very common wetlands data that we share with people. It includes the regulatory wetlands, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, freshwater regulatory wetlands, national wetland inventory wetlands. These are, you know, an informational layer that's not regulatory. It's not like the federal regulation map, but it's a better kind of more accurate version of wetlands mapping. And then we have these probable and possible wetlands, and those are based on wetland soils. So you can see the entire town is nearly covered in wetlands according to this. That's not necessarily true, but if, you know, there was some kind of project review or something came up that came before you, you could suggest more of a delineation if there's kind of these probable or possible wetlands. So this is a way that this layer can be, or this map can be used. This is kind of an interesting map. It has aquifers that are of a particular importance. This community drives all its water from groundwater. So this has public wells, but also the petroleum and chemical bulk storage facilities. So you can kind of get an idea of where there might be potential contamination of these groundwater resources, and, you know, if there's future development in one of these areas, you know, this is a good way to point out that, you know, it's going to contaminate more potentially than just its immediate surrounding area. So I think these have been really compelling, and I think that there's people see a lot of utility in this at the planning board level, you know, where some of the other more natural resources, wildlife maps maybe seem a little bit less for some communities. Here we have flood zones. This is just really the FEMA mapping. We have an additional layer that looks at the riparian area. So this was developed for Trees for Tribs, and it really models the 50-year floodplain on a lot more streams that's available for FEMA. So that's a really helpful resource that we can provide that shows kind of additional areas of potential flooding and restoration. This is kind of a unique Orange County data set. They actually mapped flooded roads during Irene and Sandy. So that's in here too, so they already know kind of on their map where there's persistent flooding. And some of that doesn't correspond to the floodplain map. You can see this road here flooded out, and maybe that's referring to this, but this is completely independent, you know, so you kind of get some interesting new data. You can have new data from kind of local sources, and that's something to keep in mind. You know, there's a lot of times there's data collected for an individual community, and kind of getting your head around what studies already exist that look specifically at the town is a good place to start. I know you were talking about what can you do in the absence of funding, and at this point a lot of it is just bringing together all the resources into a lot of communities set up a Google Drive and a folder within a Google Drive and just start compiling information there, and so that when they do start that process, they know exactly where to go and they know exactly what exists for their town. This is a historic sites. We don't generally deal too much in it, but this is something that a lot of communities like to integrate into their natural resources inventory, and they can bring in historical societies and other groups to kind of, you know, help write some of the narrative on that piece. this is some of the information that our program brings to bear. We started out really more specifically interpreting biodiversity conservation in municipal planning, and have kind of broadened to look at natural resources in general. But we do bring a lot of specific biodiversity data that our program contracts directly with partners in the state. So some of these, this is areas of known importance for animals, plants, and migratory fish. Basically what we did was we took known occurrences of rare species in the state, and we figured out what all of their adjacent habitat needs were, and then drew that on the map there. So, you know, let's say there's a rattlesnake nest here. All of this is known to be habitat for rattlesnake that this snake could be using. So it's instead of just drawing a circular boundary around, you're kind of looking at what it's using and excluding areas that maybe are developed already and aren't habitat. So this has been popular because, again, it does kind of, it's more of a common sense approach where they can say, oh, well, this part of the town is left out because it's not habitat. We know that it's not habitat, and it's not just drawing a circle around it. And this is some interesting forest data we have too. So this isn't by any means all of the maps either. Usually it's about 20 to 30 maps that are developed for these types of projects, but that kind of covers a lot of the broad topics. And here, I don't think we missed anything really. Climate conditions, I will say that some of the coastal communities have integrated things like sea level rise, marsh migration in the face of sea level rise, those type of things into mapping. We've had landslide susceptibility in certain areas that have a, you know, kind of predisposed to landslides. So it's good to think outside of the box of what you see, because part of the homework I'll give you is to just look at a lot of these documents, look as many as you can, and see what you think works and what doesn't work and what you like about certain things. So who develops an NRI? This is just to remind everyone, including us, that CACs are really designated, or Conservation Advisory Councils. I understand that your role is kind of interesting because when I think of a conservation board, that's generally what your environmental review board is, and that's essentially what happened, right? It was a conservation board, and then they spun out the environmental review board, and then you reformed.
Karen read the
Oh, I don't
from
have history of this.
1974 when things got redesignated. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
Right.
I kind of
Started now.
Yeah, I looked at the E-code on that, and it looked like that's kind of what happened. They spun off of that, and but then you all reformed and are taking on a lot of the responsibilities that, because they're regulatory at this point, that they don't have the time to address. Is that kind of correct?
And ERB is just wetlands. They keep telling. I mean, that's
okay.
Kind of their
That's
focus.
yeah.
But
Okay.
we're just an advisory board at this point. We do not issue any permits. Only the
Right.
ERB does regarding only wetlands. So it appears that there was a broad area that's kind of perhaps we weren't aware of, or because really this board was focusing on open space for a long time, but there are other areas,
Right.
a lot of other areas.
And that's a common around the state, you know, where you all have a lot of responsibilities in one or two or three, sometimes different boards. But basically what this is just saying is that, you know, conservation advisory councils and boards, you know, as part of the original enabling legislation that set these up, one of their few tasks was actually keeping an inventory and map of open areas. Because the science hadn't come as far along as it is now, they're really only talking about wetlands in this case, but it's been later interpreted to mean, you know, all known, you know, areas that are important for natural resources. And this goes at EMCs, which are the county level, and that they should be looking at doing county level NRIs as well.
Actually, can I just ask one clarifying
Yeah,
question
sure.
on that? So, you just made an interesting comment that it's beyond the scope of wetlands only.
Yes.
So, should there be, are towns expected to have a regulatory entity that deals with open space? In other words, right, we're advisory, but legally, should we have more authority in terms of that law around open?
I'm not a lawyer, so I will not, as I look into the camera, I
The
will
way that
not.
it's written.
I'm not sure about that. I will say that a lot of our other work outside of Westchester County, there's no regulation at that level. You know, the fact that there's a wetlands review board is unusual in the scheme of the entire valley and state, you know.
Right. I mean, honestly, this town, from what I was explaining, there's a planner, an assistant planner, an engineer, I'm the environmental coordinator. Right there, that's kind of not the majority. I mean, that's that assortment, having all of those together, a number of towns, even Westchesters just don't have that.
Right.
So there is like a uniqueness here, I guess, at that level. Yeah.
Right, which is fantastic, you know, that's, I mean, other places would love for that opportunity to not be stretched. I know a lot of communities that we work with are, you know, they want to work on these types of projects with natural resource inventories, but they're also doing their climate smart programs, and sometimes that draws them in different directions, or energy audits, and they're all kind of trying to do it all in one small board, so or council. So yeah, it's there's a lot to dive into as far as the legal sense, to get back to your question, and I'm not sure about that, but I know it's not happening elsewhere.
In practice.
In practice, yeah. This is a very preaching to the choir, so I won't spend a lot of time on this, but we all know that the benefits of natural resources to a community and why it's important for planners in general to be looking at these things. Yeah, I won't go into this list because we all know these things. But you know, NRIs are a really valuable resource for all planning entities in a municipality. You know, they can direct planning boards to ask more thoughtful and thorough questions about resources that are identified. They allow, you know, you can provide it to an applicant and say, hey, this is our natural resources inventory. So the applicant knows what they should be kind of writing as far as, you know, what they should be accounting for in their application for a development project. And then it allows just like planners and the general public to look at things in the bigger picture, you know, like how do resources cross boundaries, and we'll look at some more maps that kind of get at that point specifically, because I think that's really important in planning, looking beyond the site level planning. So much is parcel by parcel or a small bit of a town by small bit of a town, and we all know that, you know, we're all interconnected. So this is an example of just site plan review of how this can be useful. I know you already have a wetlands commission, but you know, this is you can kind of see the rough outline of this boundary here, and I just wanted to situate there, but you can see it's right here. And you can just simply overlay, you know, we don't know much about this parcel from the air, but we can see that there's wetlands on it and some possible and probable wetlands. Looks like there's some pockets of steep slopes, but overall it's kind of at the base of the slope here. Here we have some identified meadows, large meadows, shrublands, or grasslands on the property. So that could be something to ask questions about as far as doing a survey for that, or you know, understanding how that fits in the context of the town. Here in this forest map, we can see that there's this regionally significant forest. What does that mean? What does this development mean for how that forest is dealing, you know, suiting wildlife, how it's cleaning water, and then you can also see on top of it, it's part of this matrix forest block, which is kind of a larger regional landscape level feature, and that's again getting at, you know, nature crosses boundaries, and you know, this matrix forest block, while it looks like a really important forest here, is actually important in the Northeast in general. So that can lend credence. I usually have a better map that kind of shows it on that scale, but you just kind of take my word for it. And then here you have this map of those important areas that we were discussing. In some ways, unfortunately, the entire town is covered. This is the only section with nothing associated with it, which to some people is like, well, we can't protect it all. But it gives you a good idea of what is there and where multiple resources overlap. And might be a priority for conservation in this case. Getting back at that, you know, scale issue and looking beyond, county level NRIs are really useful. One of their limitations is that they don't, you know, they can't provide really localized resources because they need all of their data sets to cover the entire county. So if your town had a special wetlands map, that couldn't be in a county-wide NRI. Or if there was an ecological survey done at a preserve, it wouldn't make sense to put all of those little ones in a county-level NRI. But for something like this is looking at aquifers, that could be really important to see how, maybe the community downstream derives all of their drinking water from that reservoir, and, there's a land use activity that's contaminating their drinking water. We all know in the news, all the drinking water contamination stories, that's something that happens all the time. And facilitating that kind of dialogue and having towns working from a common set of facts, I think is really important for getting stuff done. And again, it provides the foundation for these kind of larger open space planning efforts that a lot of communities undertake. And they're great avenues for education. I think that's probably like the number one thing that after a community finishes their NRI, the advisory council will generally do some kind of promotional educational campaign. It's something that people can bring a lot of different expertise to. Educating landowners, like I said, providing applicants with a copy of this so that they understand how they're fitting into a town if they're coming in. It also contributes to a community saying like, oh wow, we're the #1, bat hibernaculum in the state. That's really cool and interesting, and I never thought of our town that way. I'm from Rosendale. I live in Rosendale, which is up by Kingston, and we have some bat superlatives like that, and I tell people all the time, and they're so impressed, and no one knows. But we also have a lot of caves, like a massive amount of caves, so they're like, oh, the caves, I get it, Yeah, it's so. I mean, I've found that even just in my own personal experience doing that, like people get really, excited when they see themselves in this larger context. Some communities have done this by just displaying all of their maps in the library. You end up often with the FGD's project with a beautiful set of maps, and you don't want them to end up, sitting on a shelf somewhere. So usually you get some nice big format maps, and I've heard people doing an art show, billing it as an art show, and then showing them all and having the CAC help interpret them. And so again, I think that it's amazing to see people light up when they try to find their property on the map and they can see how it fits into the town. It's pretty cool. This is our Creating a Natural Resources Inventory Guidebook. Have any of you seen this before? So we have this available on the DEC website. I'll give you a copy for now. We also have this Conserving Natural Areas in Your Community Guidebook. So this is more of a kind of cookbook or recipe book on how to put together an NRI if you're starting from scratch. It came out in 2014, and we've already kind of learned quite a bit since then. But it's a great starting point, and it's a great place to draw resources and language from. This is a little older. This is from 2008, but it goes over a lot of the things that municipalities can do to conserve resources at their level. So it goes from everything to pollinator gardening, which I know you all are involved in through H2H. But it also goes into things like critical environmental areas. I think you guys have some critical environmental areas around the reservoir, or maybe not? Don't know. This would talk about all of those things. So
What is that? What is the title of that again?
this is called Conserving Natural Areas and Wildlife in Your Community.
Thank you.
And so it's a publication put out by the DEC. I'm sure if you search it with Hudson River Estuary Program, it'll come up as the first item.
Thank you.
And I can try to share a set of these resources. I don't know if I should share it with
Just
you or what.
send it to Dennis and we can share it.
Okay.
Use
Dennis's email now, right?
Yeah, I think I do
that's
now.
fine.
Okay, yeah.
So I'll send.
Either way.
I'll send a list of all the
Sure.
digital resources. I kind of have a set of it up, kind of boilerplate that I send around anyway. So
Yeah, that would be great.
it has a lot of the stuff I'm talking about. This is just kind of an overview of our program and kind of the scope that we've been working. This is since 2014, but you can see. We're down here. I guess there's a couple new additions here, but some of our most recent projects. This is Cornwall. We were just looking at that map there. Putnam Valley, just north of here, they just finished an NRI. City of Peekskill is going to be starting one soon. So there's a lot of activity in this. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Mount Kisco's NRI.
Yes.
Yeah, that one I found.
Yeah, that was a great project. They did that very cost effectively. They funded it themselves. Didn't cost that much money. And they had that.
Yeah, Jim though. I mean, I know him from T-Town.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jim's all right.
Yeah, and Jim, and he's expressed interest as the DEC. We don't necessarily weigh in on any individual contractor, but there's so many of these communities that have used so many different people that in itself is a resource to figure out who's good and who's available at all. That's great. So we'll be happy to put you in touch with other communities. That's another good first step, is to kind of reach out to other people around you that have done these projects and kind of see what worked and write down the names of contractors and reach out to them. I'm trying to think. The other interesting thing with Mount Kisco is they were one of the first communities, they actually codified their NRI in a local law. So a lot of these, they end up getting adopted by board resolution, which is fantastic, and that's what we always recommend. But it really doesn't give it any power of law in that case. It just recognizes it as an important document. Mount Kisco actually integrated it formally into their seeker process, so anything that's a Type 2 action is looked at using the NRI. So that's really great. We actually just had another community, the city of Poughkeepsie, which I wouldn't think of being particularly environmentally focused. They just incorporated it so that every project that comes before the planning board has to do an environmental review using their NRI. Wow. And they actually developed, Vassar College developed a mapper that basically you're directed to, and they have to use that mapper to do an analysis to submit to the planning board with their application. So that's like I would say the highest and best use of the NRI is that you may not have to listen to the recommendations of it, or they may not have to protect all the resources, but at least they have to recognize that there are resources there and work to mitigate them. This is talking about some of the other benefits too. Again, fostering partnerships. I think that's been really interesting. You can see these two communities here. This is Cornwall, and then this is Blooming Grove. They worked together on both an NRI and an open space inventory. So they worked together on an NRI, and then they came back and used that same data set, and they prioritized using that NRI in public meetings. And it was really cool because, you picture yourself, and I belong to a CAC as well, so I understand how sometimes it can be very insular being in a town. They would go to each other's meetings, they got to go to each other's public presentations on things and kind of learn from each other and have input, and it was just really cool seeing that kind of communication when sometimes, at the town board level, it can be adversarial or at least, isolationist at best. The other two communities that work together this is the town of Rochester and Warson. Ellenville is that little gap in there. And they worked together on a project, and that went extremely well too. There's kind of an economy of scale with working with contractors, so you can kind of bring the cost down if they can just do a map for both and then just kind of pick off your part and pick off their part. So that's something that we always promote, and we think is kind of has its own side benefits. Organizing one of these projects also raises the profile of the CAC. All of a sudden, your role is understood as the keepers of this document. People start coming to you more for input based on because you have the best understanding if you were the ones to help develop it. So for a conservation board that's looking to kind of share their expertise, this is a great way to kind of demonstrate that you're able to create a product like this and understand it and interpret it for the town. I have conservation board status on here as well. That has to do with, becoming formally noted as a conservation board, which I don't think really applies in your case because you already have an environmental review board that's looking at wetlands. But if you had more interest in talking about that, I could go into it at a different time. Here's some I promised I would try to throw as many examples as possible. This is the town of East Greenbush. That's up, you can see Albany is right across the river there, so it's really far up. This is kind of some unique county level data on important aquatic networks, rare plant conservation areas, and this was all hyper-local data that wouldn't be in a larger inventory, but is able to be hosted here. This is Putnam Valley, a little closer to home. We have the drinking water resources, so it kind of shows wellhead protection zones and the New York City watershed and aquifers kind of all in one map, so you get an idea of where the drinking water resources are. This was a really interesting Scenic Resources Map that they did with a Hudson River Greenway grant. that was a really interesting project where they looked at where viewpoints were that were used by the public through public meetings, and then they did some mapping. You can see the darker the red basically indicates the more locations that's visible from public viewing areas. So if you were going to do some kind of prioritization to look at where's the best place to protect for view sheds, you know, this one hot spot is viewed from a lot of areas, so that's going to rank really high. And that came with all kinds of information on what was at all these stars and circles, and you know, it was really a whole side project, and they just rolled it into the NRI. And that's another thing that, you know, if you have money with a contractor and there is extra money, you know, you can kind of package it with other projects and use the NRI as a vehicle to deliver certain reports with. This is the city of Hudson, again in the northern part of the estuary. This was done in a little bit more of a magazine type natural resources kind of inventory kind of way, which it wasn't necessarily targeted as much at planning boards. It was more targeted at the general public and just educating people on what resources were where. And you can see some of that sea level rise mapping that's going to really change the coastline of Hudson there. Yeah, it's already changing quite a bit. But they also have here street tree inventory, so that might be something that's of interest here in a more urbanized part of the state. Just, you know, if maybe, I don't know, do you have a street tree inventory here or a tree?
We just plant,
committee?
streetscape just finished, so they kind of spent like 18 months, because I came in June, they were at the tail end of it, but they had to take down the former trees because they were damaging the sidewalk, so we just put in all the trees downtown in October, so
Oh, wow.
I have those cataloged, I had to pick the trees and say, okay, put one here, put one here, put one here, so.
Right.
So we have those, and then pre-existing we just have to add.
So maybe there is data that shows the locations of what those are and where there might be gaps. This is a great place to present it.
Right. And some of those gaps will persist because store owners don't want a tree in front of their store, but that's another story.
Sure, right. And there's a lot of efforts going on right now looking at kind of more urbanizing areas, street tree cover. The estuary program funded a project last year, you may have heard of it, with CUNY and Hunter College, that they're looking at urban heat island effect and trying to map that across Westchester.
There was a presentation, Melanie, I know, was there also early November.
Right, that was down in
the Greenway Nature Center. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was interesting. It was really,
so that's funded through our program, so we're somewhat involved in it. But again, that's the kind of thing that once that data's out, that'll fit perfectly with here and addressing climate change within your community and mitigating impacts. So that's a great resource. I wanted to include this, this is, you know, you don't have to look at it too closely, but it's really just showing that, you know, we work a lot with communities and help develop these sort of planning spreadsheets and to kind of work them way through the year. These projects can take anywhere from a year if everyone is really dedicated and funding's already lined up and, you know, there's a lot of capacity. It can take a year or less, but oftentimes these projects you want to account for 2 years, possibly more, just to, you know, make sure that you get everything done. Maps, you know, depending on if you have someone to do that for you or if you're working with another partner, you can have that done in as short as, you know, 3 or 4 months. But again, you kind of have to get creative if you don't have funding, and that's where the projects can kind of take a little bit longer. But some of the first steps, you know, it's we kind of talked about other first steps that I don't have up here as far as just exploring what your community wants and kind of starting that conversation. But once, you know, you've decided to get in the driver's seat, you know, essentially you would create a subcommittee that would work on the NRI because you have other business that you have to attend to in your conservation board. And once they're selected, you kind of schedule out meetings and then they'll report back to the CAC or CB and get input and bring that back to the group. And again, defining the goals of the project, you know, kind of setting the scope and the bounds. Those are kind of like the 3 major steps, and then you kind of plow right into getting those maps done and getting some reports to describe those maps. I'll leave you with some funding sources, because that's always helpful to know how someone's going to pay for this. Hudson River Estuary Program offers grants under their stewardship category. We've funded quite a bit of natural resources inventories with these. Another local example is the town of Pound Ridge. They used some of our funding through this mechanism to do that. This funding comes out in the early summer, late spring. I don't know when that's going to be, but that's a good time to keep your eye out. I'll definitely keep everyone here appraised of when that comes out with my regular kind of e-blasts. Though the funding for that is generally, I believe the low end is $10,500 to $50,000 for these. These projects typically are funded at, for just an NRI without a lot of extras, about $25,000 for the consultant to do that work. These grants typically have a 15% match to them, so that is quite a bit on 50,000 or 25,000 even, but that can be 100% in kind. So if you have resources or you have expertise in public outreach, or if you do have mapping resources or legal background where you can explore some of these questions, you can bill at your professional time if it's in a professional capacity, and that can eat through if you have technical expertise. But if not, I think 15% match is something that most people can do through just public outreach and tracking your hours closely, and even your contribution to edits to the maps or just input that you might give, report writing. These are all can easily accomplish that. The Hudson River Valley Greenway, are you familiar with that? I know I mentioned it before. I believe you're a Greenway community. I think most communities are at this point, especially down here. That would give you access to grants up to $10,000. So it's much less, and then they're 50% match. So it's a different sort of animal. They have 4 announcements per year. It's kind of like a rolling application process. So it's, if you miss it one year, you can keep on applying and may get in there. Whereas the estuary grants, you have one shot, and then if it doesn't go through, you have to just try it again the next year. So that's one possibility if you can figure out a way to just use a little bit of money. And then climate smart communities have grants as well. That's if you're familiar with applying for those grants and you think that you would have a shot at that, I would encourage you to do so. But I know because we have these other 2 grant funding sources, I haven't seen a whole lot of projects that they actually have funded down in our region here. And maybe that's just because they don't get good enough application. I don't know for sure, but those are 3 sources to check into.
I'm just curious, who's the they, who, in other words, who is the authorizing authority who would designate the Hudson River Valley Greenway or these smart communities?
So the Greenway, that's done through, I think a municipality has to sign the Greenway Compact. So it's really just a kind of affirmational.
Is it like the state or the county? In other words, who's the designating authority?
The Hudson River Valley Greenway is its own entity.
Okay.
So I believe they're technically a nonprofit housed within the state. It's one of those confusing relationships like what I'm here from. But yeah, you can go to their website and they'll have information on, exactly how they fit there. But they provide a lot of assistance mostly for municipalities in planning. So they do a lot of comprehensive plan funding. They're one of the few grant sources for doing a comprehensive plan. So they do a lot of kind of the nuts and bolts basics of municipal government, as well as these types of projects. Climate Smart Communities, that's done through its own program that's administered through the DEC.
Thank you.
My one question, because I honestly, when I was interviewed for this job, I said I'm limited in my grant application knowledge. It's one thing so my understanding was from a colleague who works elsewhere for a firm that is more fish impingement, entrainment, work a lot with power companies, and he told me about this year, but the Hudson River Estuary Grant, the focus was on like dam removals so is that the only, like in other words, that was the only one I was like kind of made aware of, so that obviously is not gonna, dovetail to an NRI or something to that effect. So are those grants like every year look for one that comes to an NRI, or obviously there's different programs and there could be sort of like a cycling where, you know, well, this year the focus is, and so therefore the grants are tailored to, and then the following year, well, the focus is, so the grants are going to be tailored to, or am I not thinking correctly as to how that works? That's kind of, I guess, my general.
No, it is confusing. That's a
to
good
try
question.
to, corral that.
So there's a lot of programs within the Hudson River Estuary programs. There are a lot of teams that form that up. One of those teams is the kind of fish focus, which looks at dams and barrier removal and culverts and that kind of thing. So they have their own grant announcement that comes out pretty much once a year. And then ours comes out under the stewardship heading at a different point in the year. And there's an education and access one that comes out at a different point. So it is like a yearly, generally a yearly cycle, but it's repetitive yearly. So generally we'll have a stewardship announcement every spring that will just cover projects that basically include natural resources inventories, open space inventories, or indices, open space plans, so any kind of like planning that involves natural resources or open space. We've also expanded that to look at conservation finance research. So if you had an interest in starting a program for paying for land conservation, there's money available to kind of explore what your options are and come up with a plan for addressing that. So I guess, yeah, you don't have to worry. There's usually a yearly funding source for this.
And then, now, under that umbrella, is there a way to sort of, because, you know, we were talking about this earlier, you know, when you, like at the last meeting, I think it was, you know, I just brought in the cover sheet and the table of contents, some of, for the NRI, some of which you mentioned.
Right.
And, you know, I said there's a lot of subject matter here, and as you pointed out, there's a number of maps, and, you know, is that something that, you know, if you wanted to take on and develop, could you do it sort of in like this, and to me it would make sense to do this, but I don't know if you guys, with the funding and all, would work this way, almost like this staged approach whereby, you know, how do you speak or start to speak intelligently about, you know, your town or your resources unless you sort of have this depiction being a map, and then what would be those resources of concern, you know, so like in other words, like to start writing in the absence of that, or to try to develop text, you know what I mean, to a report to support that in the absence of, you know, sort of seeing that, and then even having the ability to ground truth some of that, you know, it may be that, you know, some of the, and I don't know if it's happened, some of the money that you're talking about or some of what you're applying for, so let's say you do that year one and it's like, okay, for that amount of money we could probably generate 30 maps of, you know, GIS quality that would cover these resources, and that would sort of get us started, you know, with respect to, okay, we got the figure section of the report, you know what I mean, and now, you know, we know how to even develop a table of contents, you know, that, you know, maybe something is not of concern that we thought it was because it's not showing up on the layer, or, you know, that data's, like the map's not even gonna be produced, you know what I mean? So that's my point, like, would it have to be like for the application, we're going for an NRI, or in an attempt to, you know, start the process to consolidate what our subject matters and our focus would be in terms of developing a table of contents, we would like to start developing resource maps that would allow us to, like, does that,
I don't think you would be.
typically do that, or?
Yeah, I don't think you'd be technically precluded from, you know, sending in an application that way. I just think that it wouldn't be competitive with other communities submitting for full, just to do the entire project outright.
Okay.
That's my sense of it. We've been getting more and more competitive as we've been kind of doing this NRI roadshow, and more and more communities are doing it. So I think that potentially a while ago that might have been something, but at this point, there kind of is a bank of consultants that have been through this process at this point. And if you were to write for that grant and hired a consultant with that, that would give you an idea. The other thing is that whenever you get an estuary grant like this, if you were to receive it, that comes with a lot of technical assistance directly from us. So I would be heavily involved in that entire process, even though, you know, some grantees just, you know, will release the money and say, report back at the intervals and give me a final product. we're lucky to be able to invest my time into that. So I will be at all the meetings, regular correspondence. I can share all of everything that we know about how these projects have been set up, timelines, moving things forward, project deliverables, that kind of thing. So with that kind of structure and support, I think that it's not as heavy of a lift as it might seem at this point, especially with so many completed NRIs that we have now, where communities who have really had not as much support as having a full planner or environmental coordinator that have been able to kind of pull it off. And sometimes the quality of that isn't maybe as good as it could be for that reason, but I do think that that's possible. The one example I'll bring up that kind of reminds me of what you're talking about is that we did have, I mentioned the city of Peekskill. They have a CAC member who had just started learning and took up an interest in ArcGIS, which is the mapping software that a lot of this is done in. And so I assisted her in kind of starting to create the maps herself. So that was a really strong match that they were able to, they got a Greenway grant to write their report. So they're going to be building the maps with our support, and they're bringing a contractor out to do it piecemeal in that way, but they'll have a final product at the end. That's the difference.
That does trigger, because there were some, and I can't remember which town it was, from printing out the table of contents and the covers and whatever, but there was, I don't know if it was credits or whatever, but how some of the GIS was developed, and there definitely was this, thank you for your time, or, thank you for, okay, gotcha,
but that is a good question, and I've heard that, I've gotten that before, and just, I think the reality is that doing one big project is going to be the most competitive way, because a lot of these granting agencies, they want a deliverable to be able to say that they've accomplished with this funding, and I think that's, if there wasn't other applicants, there'd be more of a compelling case to spend the money on developing that, but at this point, I don't necessarily see that as being feasible.
Okay.
So this is all I had on this. Missy had requested that I look at the natural resource mapper. I don't know what you have time-wise. I'd be happy to take more questions. I can show you this tool really quickly. It all depends on, what you all want. Would you be interested in this? So this is a mapper that our program curates that kind of has a lot of the natural resources inventory data on it. So this is another thing that you can explore. By the way, I've also brought a bunch of fact sheets, and I'll hand those out, and one of them is for this natural resource mapper. But if that's okay, if you all have a couple minutes, I'll show it to you. And we've actually done a lot of trainings on this. Last year, again, we hit the road and did about 5 trainings across the estuary. I'm gonna say okay. This is in my computer, so. Anyway, so if you were to type in Hudson Valley Natural Resource Mapper into Google, the first thing to come up would be this, and this is the landing page. And of course, you're at the DEC now in this. But it has this fact sheet that I will be giving everyone a copy of. It has a webinar recording that kind of goes really step by step into how to use this to troubleshoot. So if there's one thing you're worried about, you can kind of skip through it to see if anything works for you, and slides. But you can just click right here to go into it. This is our legal disclaimer telling you that this is for planning purposes only, and that things must be field verified. But here we have the estuary. This is the boundary. It's kind of a Google Maps-y interface. I wouldn't give it that much credit, but it's very good for a state mapper, I'd say. A lot of the kind of intuitive sort of clicking features exist. Some don't, so you should use that resource. But let's find your town. So you can go to reference layers here. All the information is stored in these tabs. You can click on towns. Oh, it's unavailable. Okay. Well, we're just going to have to figure it out ourselves. Yeah. Luckily, they already have these kind of dashed lines on here, so it's not that difficult to find. And I'm a geography nerd, so I know where to go. You can click on this little full screen, I'll give you a better view on it, and here we have it, at least to this degree. So a lot of, I won't go over the estuary layers, but we have, you know, river depth, migratory fish runs, that's kind of a cool one, because that goes into the estuary. We'll see how long. If it takes too long to load a lot of these layers, I won't bring them up. In a lot of cases, the migratory fish ones, when they run way past up, you know, you can see some here, or this right here, you can click on them, and it'll tell you what the DEC has found there. An American eel is what they found. So American eel, they migrate up from the Sargasso Sea as tiny glass eels and move into the estuary and live in the watershed and then come down 20 years later or so to spawn and die. But they go way up in the watershed. So, you know, the fact that this migratory fish that, you know, breeds and dies in the Bermuda Triangle is living outside of Mount Kisco for most of his life is pretty cool.
That is cool.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
So that blue line, is this where the migration, literally the waterway? right?
Yes.
So are we able to find the property owners, obviously I'm sure there is a way, who live alongside of that? In other words, I'm just thinking of how, when you were talking about
The
like
Westchester
community
GIS
education.
would be able to
Yeah.
show that property map layer.
Right, so the Westchester GIS can probably give you better information on that exact property owner, but for reference, we do have the latest county tax parcels on here as well. So at least you can see the shape of all of the lots. It doesn't give you their contact information or anything
No.
like
Right.
that, but you could print out a map
Names, yeah.
with this and, you know,
And then
be
go
able
to
to
Westchester,
compare it.
yeah.
It's just cool because as we find important, you know, anything noteworthy that people might be interested in, to really reach out to on a stewardship level. To
Totally. This is those critical environmental areas that I was talking about before. This looks like maybe I thought you had in the south here somewhere. I mean, I see there's one here. That looks like it's in Bedford. But this is looking at, it's an overlying aquifer. So they identified an aquifer to be, it's basically CEAs or critical environmental areas are just a tool for seeker that, like, when they're doing seeker, they have to take an extra look at a certain area that's designated. So, and again, I'll go through this pretty quickly. We have a lot of water data available here, and this is all updated regularly and streamed from our sources. Known DEC dam inventory and assessed stream crossings for passability for migratory fish. We have priority waters and DEC regulated streams. All that information is there, including whether it's a known trout stream. We have a product called the Stream Condition Index that basically uses land cover condition to kind of estimate the quality of a stream. So you can use that to look at what your highest, cleanest streams might be, or healthiest streams. FEMA data is streams directly from FEMA, so that's a really nice resource to have. We have those wetland layers that we were talking about in the NRI maps. As I said before, since we curate this tool, a lot of the data we recommend is right here. So we have these large forests. I don't want to, you should be clicking stuff on and off. I'm being very bad at managing this map right now. But, you know, it's streaming a lot of data, so the idea is to click on and click off. But any of these layers, see this little eye next to it, or right here, you can click on that and it'll bring it to a page that has a succinct description. So if you ever want to tell someone what this map means instead of just pointing at it, you have a reference right there.
I'm just curious, with vernal pools, do you have a way to kind of capture that? Have you come up with any creative ways to identify them and map them?
The best way at this scale to suggest where a vernal pool might be would be to use this national wetlands inventory, and where you see like little tiny wetlands, you know, that's a potential vernal pool if it's not open water. So if it says like forested swamp or emergent, what is the other category? Freshwater emergent swamp or freshwater forested shrub wetland. If you see a little dot of those somewhere, that could be a vernal pool.
Because is the map done, because it's so seasonal, are the maps done like, you know, each season, or just?
So the National Wetlands Inventory was done using remote sensing from satellite imagery, and that was done Yeah, that would have been satellite. So they do that generally in spring, so they can kind of see underneath the canopy. So it's one point in time. There's really not a great, vernal pools are such a local feature.
So transient, you know.
Yeah, so that can give you an idea of where you might want to look. So you have this forest layer, and it'll tell you that this is all contiguous forest, or at least roughly contiguous. And it's considered locally important on the scale of, you know, this town. So you can see where kind of some of your largest, most important forest areas might be in the town. And then we have those biodiversity layers, those important areas. We've kind of broken them out since that NRI map came out, so we have like just areas that are important for bats, for wetland animals, for terrestrial animals, so you can kind of have a better idea. There's always a balance with rare species information, not to give too much away, but the Heritage Program, which manages all of this for the state, has blessed that this is the right amount.
The bubble is large enough so that, right.
Right, and no one, it's a terrestrial animal, you don't know if that's, you know, a rattlesnake or a bald eagle,
Right,
you know.
right.
So anyway, that's supposed to be somewhat helpful in that case. We also have Audubon important bird areas, significant natural communities, areas that are just exemplary on a statewide level. So you can really get to know where some of the most important layers are.
But that's available.
So these are already, just to be clear, this has already been mapped.
It's
Yes,
already loaded.
Right,
so.
that's amazing.
it's already there. So
Who populated it initially?
what was that?
Who populated it initially?
So this was done at the DEC. We were able to just bring all those data layers together and have them viewed in this map. DEC has a couple other mappers that I'll share some fact sheets. We won't go over that today. But you can search for locations. Again, it's not as nimble as a Google search. Like you have to spell it exactly right, and you have to make sure address is clicked if it's an address, or municipality with no address. You know, it's that kind of thing. It's not so intuitive, but it works pretty well. There's also tools here for measuring distances or polygons. So we have miles, and you know the elementary school is 2 miles from as the crow flies to Whippoorwill Park. So that can be helpful in understanding maybe roughly how many feet of frontage does a property have against a Class B regulated DEC trout stream.
Right.
You know, you can kind of come up with a fairly precise estimate using real data in this case. And you can print these maps. It might be better just on it. The printing feature here isn't the best because it doesn't spit out a map legend, which is a huge limitation for creating a map. But you could have, let's say, CEAs in the town of Newcastle only display one feature, put that in the title, and it's kind of self-explanatory as to what it is. But that's this tool in a nutshell. I use it all the time, even as a GIS user, because it's just easy. It can be very quick, and you know, it's well curated. And you can click on most everything. So one thing you have to do is you have to manually click off the measure tool. See, these are the non-intuitive pieces of this tool, but you know, it's a state tool. So, but anyway, that's that. So, does anyone have any questions?
Not so far.
Okay, great. Well, that's all I have tonight. But I will share the resources I promised, including the slides from the PowerPoint. I have fact sheets for those who are interested. Does everyone want to have?
Sure.
I'll divvy those up.
So let me ask, there's another question came to my mind based on sort of what we were discussing before. So is there an evaluation in terms of, because I could see different communities potentially have, you know, different focuses, and so is there an evaluation of like, wow, you know, they're really looking at a lot of categories and this community's not looking as many categories, but the community may not care about the other categories or may want to just target, you know, like for example, how this sort of came up, you know, we as a town may not be as concerned with, I've gotta try to think of something, right. Shoreline sea level rise, that's not gonna be, you know, let's say maybe in our table of contents per se, because we're kind of, you know, the central, and
Right.
for us to, you know, dedicate time to a section, which is then gonna be cost for someone to write that.
Sure,
It
yeah.
would be like, okay, that wouldn't be, you know, one of our sections.
Exactly.
But you don't lose credit because
No.
suddenly that comes out, okay.
That's like
Yeah.
thoughtful consideration of what it's important to you as a
Right,
community.
right.
So
Caribou migration, that's off the table, like you don't, right,
absolutely.
okay, gotcha.
Yeah, and I mean that level of detail wouldn't have to go into a grant anyway at that point. It would just be, we want to do this. And that
Okay.
would just be part of your process, right?
Right.
Like the first early meetings would be looking at a lot of these, what do you like, what do you not like? If you've done that in advance, great, that'll make your process go quicker, but that can also, you know, that's expected to be, there's expected to be some kind of more tightening of the scope as you start that out.
So I'll stop following you and look at an application and then,
It's
Merit
done
was doing
through
that.
the Grants Gateway,
yeah, we
Which-
had some experience with that.
Oh,
Yeah, so
good.
that's good, yeah.
because people generally really hate that.
Oh,
so.
thankfully I had Kellen who works in our office, he was very helpful for the, I just did the writing, I'm like, okay, how do you upload this and all the other details he was very good at.
Yeah, so I'm counting out there's you guys over there as well.
No, we're fine.
You're fine? Okay.
Yeah, it's good.
And I'll share all this stuff. I only have 8 of some of these.
Is it all, it's all online too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe what I'll do is I'll just give you the natural resources inventory and the mapper. Does that sound good? And then everything else I'll share with you online.
Yeah.
That works for me. So we have this, if you want to pass this around. And then this is the mapper, if you want to pass that around. But anyway, well, thank you for inviting me.
Thanks
Thanks
for
for
coming
coming.
out. Thank you.
If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me. That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, thanks for giving an overview, it really helps.
Yeah, no, it can be kind of intimidating and confusing, but I think once you start to look at a couple examples, it's more straightforward than it maybe comes across at first.
Do you find that other boards are, open to talking with folks who are about to go through the process for like lessons learned?
Other conservation, of course, yeah. And I really do suggest doing that. Yeah, Mount Kisco would be a really good one just because they're adjacent to you and you have a lot of the same resources. We didn't work really closely with them on the data that they used, but they can help with that process. And Hudson Valley, they're a good one as well.
Have places like Pleasantville gone adjacent?
Mount Pleasant started this, and they have a set of maps, and they're one of these projects that's taking longer. So,
Immersed in it now.
yeah, and it's like it gets it kind of goes underground and comes up again. They're one of those long term. You want to kind of like have momentum and push it through, or you can just in this sort of, you have maps but you can't get the narratives done. And
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
yeah, no problem.
Is there any way to scale
Yeah.
Fantastic.
is it gonna be on, okay, so Dennis
It's
is mine gonna be
entirely,
on here?
it's entirely up to you. I'm not sure how to go from there to there without, like he had, I guess a portable drive, so he was able to do that.
Oh, is the Dell the
Yeah, is
conservation
that-
board?
Is there another cable that, like how would you do this? Like, I'm asking everybody, cause I'm not.
Right, take
I'm
care.
not-
This is
Is
not
that
the way.
HDMI?
Well,
There you go, you go.
Either way, you're the same,
I've already committed. Alright.
I think you can all probably see this.
Yeah, whatever you wanna do is fine. by me.
Kevin, if you stand over there, I think everybody will be able to see this.
Wait,
but,
let's just see if this, I'm not,
is it on Google, was it on like Google?
no,
I didn't bring the flash
no,
drive.
there's
that
nothing
was
that's
smart.
connected into that, but it doesn't.
Is it on the,
You
is
know
it on a
what?
Google Drive though,
If you
or
want me
something?
to help you, I know I have a
I
flash
think I
drive
can
if
throw
you
it
want.
on there. Is this somebody's laptop?
It's a
Yeah,
conservation.
Oh,
It's
okay,
the-
sorry.
yeah.
Let's see.
It's the town, so, and that's logged in as me, so everybody's
Oh, great,
all
okay.
good to go,
All
yeah.
right, so let me see if I can do this. Well, why don't you start talking about, from your,
You have the floor.
Oh, yes, I think it's over here, 1 second.
Dennis, because you can easily get, right Dennis, you can easily get into your email.
I
From
hope,
here?
yeah, I am
In
there,
theory,
in theory.
Okay, So first thing is, again, I would just like to thank the Conservation Board for allowing me to come share my ideas tonight for the NCBS. And also just like to say thank you also to Haven Colgate and Susan Harris of Hastings for providing us materials we can edit for Newcastle.
Dennis can tell you that.
And also like to thank Hugh, Lucille, and Melanie for helping me gather these ideas. You're welcome. And also just to let you know what's also available is there's your two sheets that show of invasive species. One is of New York State, one is actually of New Jersey too. And easily definitely well over 100 different species of invasives in New York and New Jersey.
Kev, if you sit over here, I'll try to get this sent so we can show it in the big one, but why don't you start from there, cause it's,
Okay.
you know, it's already been a long meeting.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, that's fine, I mean, I can see.
unexpectedly long.
See that, that's fine. Yep.
Thanks, Tom.
I'm all good. 'Cause it's
So-
just a distraction.
So this presentation about is about called Saving Our Trees with the Newcastle Vine Squad, the proposal. So first of all, to start out with that invasive species, these are the results of what happens when they take over. This is what invasion of invasives look like. And so the Newcastle needs a vine squad just as Hastings has one and Irvington has one. So and the example of invasive in this picture is called a kudzu, KUDZU, and it's just covering up, the wooded areas. So, as with the 5 Ws, as part of it, why are invasives a problem? Well, invasives, first and foremost, are plants that don't serve any function for other members of an ecosystem, where it evolved to be like. And they take over a growing space, choking out all the other plants and trees and flora, if not in general. And additionally, they can modify the ground nutrients, water availability, chemical growth inhibitors, microbial communities, and nutrient cycling. So why do we need to protect healthy trees from invasives? Well, healthy trees provide food for specialist insects such as caterpillars, which then would provide food for birds. For example, it takes 9,000 caterpillars to raise a single brood of Carolina chickadees. So, as there's many on the list if you look of invasive species, but first of all, many of these invasives come from East Asia as well as Europe. And some of the top 4 examples that I would show people would be the Japanese knotweed up here, which can grow a lot on wood edges or along roads. And then the common reed, also known as the Phragmites down here, is what you probably see in a lot of wetland spots. And the common barberry, and then the mugwort, which is common invasive in a lot of spots with a lot of green shrubs. So now we're going on to the Newcastle Vine Squad. So what this would do is round up volunteers from the Newcastle Garden Club, Horace Greeley High School Sustainability Club, the AP environmental science students, and also the EPIC ambassadors. So although the EPIC committee is not responsible for the Vine Squad, and the SAB and any are there any other groups? But and to go on the high school teams and clubs, as well as some middle school classes and parent groups. So how would this work? So what if this? Let's say that if a group could make a long-term commitment to making a space. So as in the following steps, the group could clear invasives starting in a particular area, and then next that same group could return to that space repeatedly to maintain it, and ultimately the group plants native species before other invasives take over. And then fourth thing would be to use this motto called right plant, right place, which would be to make the right decision about what plants would be needed to provide ecosystem services there. So it would mean that a group will examine the space to see what is growing and find out what plants are missing that would further provide ecosystem services for native birds and insect pollinators. So then here's the to-do list. On the left, the Newcastle Conservation Board, and then on the right, Newcastle Vine Squad. So going across, I think these each bullet from left to right is connected. So just to start out, the Conservation Board finalizes and approves required volunteer liability waiver paperwork, while NCVS outreach to potential volunteers, and now NCCB approves training process. Well, NCVS, question is who will do safety training. So now the NCCB designates areas for invasive removal and remediation. So then connected for the NCVS, so who will create invasive ID materials and disposal instructions. And finally here, NCCB purchases replacement native plants for the remediated areas. Well, so for NCVS is to schedule groups for different spaces. So now going on to safety guidelines for all of this is so first of all, it's very important that two people at least are working together. It's more risky to work alone. So no lopping alone. So when you think of this, it's good to think of a giant extra set of eyes. You know, it's really about using that sense when you're working like this. And so one of the best examples, what to use this for is, let's say in this picture, loose limbs, kind of like this, that might be ready to fall. Now moving on to equipment. So the right equipment is critical, and they have to use the equipment correctly, everyone. So you have the hard hat, cutters, safety gloves, and loppers, and safety vests like here, I'm here to show you tonight.
That's great.
Yes. So now there's two things that we need to recognize and to be safe while we're working. First, there's visible hazards, which are things that we would recognize at first glance. They include thorns up here, which in fact many are invasives themselves, since they were brought here from like East Asia because, of course, deer wouldn't eat them. And then there's poison ivy, which is in fact native, but could irritate us, and we got to recognize what it looks like in all 4 seasons. So these are all the 4 seasons of what poison ivy looks like. And then, of course, the third thing to watch out for would be, again, loose overhead branches. If you see something like this above you, it may fall off soon. So now here are more invisible hazards, or things that we might not see at first glance unless if we look harder and in more detail. So, of course, we need to watch out. We need to be aware of ticks, invisible cracks in like thick trunks or branches, and of course, we got to be aware about what the wind's impact might be like, the speed of the wind. So now, here are what the volunteer forums look like. So the NCCB needs to review and approve these. This one is for the liability release and sign-in, and then next one is under volunteer service agreement. I think by under the Taconic region. Okay, so that's the slide. So, you have any questions?
Have you thought about, because you brought up a good point, like what would be recommended disposal other than trash bagging off site? We've had problems with that in my other life, you know. It's you're not gonna be able to do burns, you know, I guess on site. That probably would be a problem, so we'd have to get depending on where this is, I guess we'd have to just figure out a mechanism to get the bags out of there. That's kinda how I was thinking, depending on how many bags we fill, so I didn't think of that until you said that, so that's a good point.
So you're asking about what bags to use?
No, like how we would get rid of them, like, you know, cause I could see this, you know, if it was on public property, I would just have to make sure that, you know, I coordinate either with Parks or Public Works to say, listen, we'll bring them out, cause those guys are not gonna walk in the woods to go get this stuff, you know, so we'll make sure that we have it out and somewhere, so, yeah.
The other issue too, Dennis, is that it has to be, from what I understand, a lot of the stuff has to be burned.
Right.
And Peekskill, I think, does T-Town use Peekskill's incinerator to burn this stuff? Does anybody know about that? I mean, that sounds like something we could find out and.
Yeah, and depends on when you're cutting.
Okay.
For, you know, the goal is before seed formation, so the disposal dilemma and complications can be partially addressed, not completely addressed, with the timing of the removal with it. So somewhat. Some are just nasty characters all year long, and you know, it's not seeds that is the problem with that. But not all plant material would pose the same amount of complication and coordination. It depends on whether you do targeted by plant or targeted by site, and then you have multiple things to get rid of at the same time too.
Dennis, that's a great question. So we are basically modeling this proposal after Hastings and Irvington. Okay. And they've been doing this for.
Because I believe all of our waste is incinerated in Peekskill, right? Charles Point is still active, so indirectly or directly, we would get it there, you know, so that would be
I'm
good.
not sure what allowances they make for this kind of material, but something was worth looking into.
This was such a great presentation, so thank you for this.
Oh, thank you.
Can you tell us how you came up with this idea and how long you've been working on it before you came to us today?
Sure. So well, after, after some, well, I got, more information about this from the, invasives, invasive flora presentation down at, Irvington Library.
Oh, sure.
And, that was, but I think also, and further before I'm at, some native plant, classes from WCC, but also when I've been volunteering at these days as well at Teton Lake Reservation and Croton Point Park.
That's great.
Thank you.
Do you have a sense of when you would want to start this?
Right now, we only know of one other volunteer who wants to do this. Only because Kevin is here as an EPIC committee member, but we would imagine that there'd be lots of small groups that would want to participate in this. And this is Brendan Klein, this is Tara Klein, they're here from Pleasantville, and the reason they're here is they have a group called Tic Tac Go Green that also does a lot of outdoor. Do you want to talk about the Tic Tac Go Green?
Sure.
But it's like, so there are lots of small constituencies, I think, that would find this a meaningful project. And as I said,
might want to do it.
right,
you know,
yeah, exactly. So it's, I think, getting the paperwork, volunteer paperwork, kind of reviewed and approved, seems to be the gateway. And then once that's done, some sort of training, demo. I don't know what else would need to be done.
Right, and then it's the volunteer management piece
Yeah,
of it,
yeah,
on an ongoing basis
Right.
like that, yeah.
and I could help with that. I mean, I'm willing to help with the just who's doing what, where, when. That's not too difficult.
If you want, I could, because I volunteer at T-Town too, love that place. And there's a woman I do Wildflower Island mostly, and she's given me her card and I have it at home. Her name is Diane Alden, and it's part of the Old Croton Aqueduct, and every year in May she's soliciting for volunteers to, do a day of pulling. And I spoke to her once about, how do you go about, from the forms and the safety, whatever, and they got a nice routine. So I could, I'll just PDF her card and make sure that I email it to you, because that's probably a good person to talk with, since she's got a program going, and she's a very nice lady.
She's
Yep.
I just hope you have enough time to help us out here.
Sure
You're
thing.
getting busy with so many places, so.
It is true, but
Yes.
I'll do my best.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate that.
Yes, thank you.
Are you taking this presentation to other groups? Like, are we the first ones you're presenting it to?
As a matter of fact, yes.
That's great.
All right.
So from us, you need town kind of, not approved, but town.
I think of this as like the mechanism. I
Yeah,
guess,
to town.
yeah.
To get those other ducks in a row, like
Right,
the
right.
The two forms that you had on
forms
there.
and the,
Right.
Liability waiver.
The liability waiver.
Right, this is not a Boy Scout project, this is not it, right, it's part of the town conservation board, and, right, okay.
Yeah.
And it would be owned by, in other words, would it be a partnership ownership, or?
Yeah, so Haven worked, was on the Hastings, so well, it appears most likely that different town conservation boards act differently. Haven is actually on the conservation board, so the forms, it's on the town website, but it is not a town sponsored. They use their own, she and Susan Harris, I believe, use their own email accounts. They maintain the list of volunteers, they send out that information. So it is affiliated, and exactly the way, the language that is used, I'm not quite sure. But it did originate from their conservation board. Irvington has it set up a little bit differently. There is a Rivertown Green project, Green Initiative, I'm losing the formal language of what all of these things are called, but they're working on establishing one, I believe it's Sleepy Hollow or Terrytown as well. So it might be slightly different, with Newcastle, they did receive town board approval for that, although it is not run by the town per se.
Okay.
Because these are public properties, so
Right, that's
they, it's important that the town be aware. It also helps with planning what is happening in town. There's also with helping out, as some of these areas are targeted, it's also a chance to work towards a invasive management plan. You're taking care of some of these public areas, replanting, and that is also useful for Park and Rec and Department of Public Works. So I think it's important that it work very closely with the town.
With the town, so working
Yeah.
with the town.
Rather than being held separately.
Do you have a sense of the budget for the plants? In other words, you talked about you take out the invasive plants and then you put in native plants. Are there other models around where the funding comes from to buy the plants?
Haven spoke about funding that they had received, and I have no idea what they would have for purchasing.
Right.
I think one of the goals of the Vine Squad is just be managing invasives and whatever, I think whatever else is able to be used to fill those spaces in.
Right.
There's certain invasive, once you can manage it, you've really protected some trees, for example.
Right.
Kevin
Started
used
with taking
to belong to the, they had a trail club at the high school for many years. And Kevin would go down with the trail club and do free a tree with Groundwork Hudson.
Right.
So I'm wondering what groundwork, but that was mostly tree invasive specific. They weren't so much working on mugwort or
Like bittersweet vine, bittersweet
Yeah,
vine.
yeah.
Right.
So in that case, you're not really looking to replace with a native plant, you're just
Free the
trying to
tree,
free the
yeah.
tree. So I think there's different pieces to this that we could be focusing on, and then, if we get far enough, there could be some planning for, I mean, but the 50th anniversary birthday always is a nice time to think about, plantings of natives, but I know that it's gonna be done on many different levels in other ways through the town, but
If we could just get people to do their own yards too,
Yeah,
it's like, right?
So we had,
It's
Haven offered us a,
Do their own
Like,
yards,
right?
take care of their own yards.
Well, I mean, get rid of the invasives on your own yard.
Yeah, oh,
Lucille,
yeah.
Haven had a nice letter, a very kind letter that they used in Hastings, which basically says, "Dear neighbor, we've noticed that.
Oh my gosh.
If you would like help,
Right.
please
I
be in
wanted
touch
to do
with
that
us."
for how many years did I want to do that? It's like I want to go put a note on people's doors.
Right, so part of it is when they're working close to an area, they say, we're working at this area, and these invasives have been found in the area, and, we're happy to identify, they do, I mean. Steal that with it. So it's really a chance to pull together a lot of the things that we had been talking about, at the conservation board, and just, our typical conversations are about how we hate barbarian and euonymus and things like that, but a chance to kind of coordinate that into a program.
Yeah. So, Jackie, could you get the letter, or whoever knows Haven, like some of her materials and stuff?
Well, we got all,
we
she
do.
she happily shared the materials.
Oh.
I mean, I think this is really becoming, like, one of the reasons Tara is here. I think a lot of towns would like these kind of template ways of getting started.
Yeah.
Because everybody's finding they need this for a variety of reasons.
Yep.
And,
Let's share resources and
without
processes,
recreating
you don't
the
have to
wheel.
yeah.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah, makes sense.
So, Kev, do you have a sense of what the next step would be? Would you like to reach out to the rest of the EPIC committee ambassadors and let them know that you spoke to the board? I know Justin was interested.
Sure, absolutely.
And then maybe we'll wait for approval of the volunteer forms? Is that the next step?
And who approves, how does that approval happen?
I have no idea.
You'd have to review with the town attorney.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that something we should do?
The letter.
I'm
I'm
not
not
We
sure
do have
that-
forms, I know, I think we've talked about this, that parks has, like, for example, when they, you know, have Boy Scouts come on, Girl
Right.
Scouts, so
Yes,
it would
liability,
be
yep.
modeled like after that, I would
Gotcha.
imagine, I haven't seen
So
it,
maybe you
but,
can merge
yeah.
the,
Yeah.
merge the two.
Sure, well, maybe Melanie
Yeah.
and I can go down to the park, you know, we can go
We'll
to
do
the
that.
rec office and show them what we have and see if it.
You'll probably get a better response than me, so go right ahead.
Yeah, and then see how to do that. Okay, that's awesome.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thanks
Should
so
we,
much.
can you come back at some point and we can touch base again
Oh,
on
yes.
this?
Yeah.
Yeah, or just, yeah, just
Sure.
email us.
Sure. Yeah. Sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
And thanks,
Thanks,
Kevin.
Kevin.
That was great.
Thank you.
Good job, Mary.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Oh, wait, one more thing, should we try to plan something for April?
For
Or
this,
Earth Day,
yeah, like
Earth
a
Month.
nice
Yeah.
Like
kind of
Kickoff,
Yeah,
Oh, Melanie had an idea for just kind
Bonfire.
of like a friends and family kind of
Bonfire
informal
invasives,
thing.
let's do that.
Yeah, so that was really like a photo op day too,
Yeah,
'cause
yeah.
I love the vests,
Yeah.
and so they,
I have six. I think the presentation was great.
yeah, the presentation was great.
Would you be willing to do a presentation?
Yeah.
Anytime.
It was great, maybe it should be done for this part
so
of
we can
Earth
go
Day.
shopping.
Because I learned a lot,
yeah.
I'm glad you did.
I did.
And using that before we go to town.
That was a great presentation.
That's a great idea, yeah,
Possible to even
So
do
I'll-
like
I'll-
a
we'll be
vine
in touch.
cutting
Right.
take leisure
Oh.
during Earth Month.
Could we put
Yeah,
on
that's a great
a
idea.
That sounds like
calendar?
a great
The
opportunity
rec-
for many
like,
people.
why couldn't that be like a rec,
This is a lot of like
thing?
get families to come out and all of the groups in town that are, you know, like-minded, and that would be a possibility.
To us.
And we have space on our calendar for it still. But we do have a number of events set up already, so
Yeah, so that would be
it's really good.
Yes.
So we will, you know, get in touch with you about when you might be available and figure it out from there.
And if we can get the paperwork ready by then,
Yeah,
so that gives us a goal.
Yeah. If we do one thing, we can't finish it, how fast.
And I
So
think
cute, right?
before we get into.
And Melanie, I think, knows Diane's thing too.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Really
Dennis.
appreciate it.
Thank you so
Absolutely.
much.
Thank you so
Anytime.
much.
It's a huge step
Well, I see it
forward.
everywhere.
Yes.
Good job, Kevin, that was
Yeah,
great.
thank you so much.
Anytime.
Yeah, I mean, it's,
Okay, got that.
Yeah,
I don't know what we're gonna do.
right, I,
Invasives,
yeah, better, this is perfect.
Yeah,
I think
whose
it would
green
be-
folder?
And we could
Great.
get like,
Oh, that's our agreement. Thank you.
with the land trust, we know.
Thanks again, Ben.
Right, no, I think
You're
you're
right.
Absolutely.
yeah, or, and I think just, even just,
I think
like
there's
as a
a
kid,
pen on
was
the
just,
floor.
Thank you, that's a great idea.
So like Tracy, we suggested areas.
and after, that's important.
Lots of pictures of
You're
how
right.
people are in minds.
No, you're right, that's so important too.
So Karen, do you wanna lead with item number 3, or do you want me to lead, and then you could come off with me, or how
You
to?
mean the town basketball playground?
No, I didn't
Good night, everyone.
Good night, thank you. Item 3 is, cause I know
What are we doing for Earth
Sue's got a calendar.
Oh,
I
Yeah,
just,
I didn't print it out.
no, it's alright, I just wanna, like, going forward, like, it seemed like from the time we left our last meeting, and, you know, I wasn't sure, I didn't know if there was a plan or not, and then it seemed like plans started unfolding in the world of email, and that's always, you know, I'm like, okay, who could check it, who can't, you know, and then 4 people are responding, and it just, I'm like, okay, so,
I'm looking at a different.
oh, that's alright,
The wrong
I
thing.
printed the wrong one, okay.
No, you didn't, I don't think.
So, no, this was, cause I know that moving forward, cause we're gonna have like a master calendar, and it's, and, you know, maybe the late great Terry Jones of Monty Python fame has me thinking about this too. Like, I remember them in an interview saying, like, how did you guys work? I mean, there was a whole bunch of you, and how did you, and he said, you know, we kinda naturally just went off into groups sometimes, you know, like, don't ask me how, it just sort of evolved that way. Whether it was like interest or, you know, their approach or comedic, whatever it may be, it was like, no, we weren't all 5 or 6 at a table, like it wouldn't have worked that way, you know? There was also no email in 1970 or whatever, so I don't know how they then collaborated again, and
Hold on.
maybe email's not necessarily the greatest thing, cause sometimes you think you've collaborated and you haven't, you know what I mean, cause you got it out there, but,
yeah, nobody connected.
right, so that was, I don't really have like a form for 3, it's just that I think that's the broad topic.
No, I agree. Unfortunately, we were looking at the wrong printout, so
Yeah.
what
I
is-
know, sorry
This
about
last
that,
month.
that was me.
No, no, so, yeah, I mean, I think that, I think that there, and what happens obviously is, Des was saying, with emails, it's kind of a lot of strings. And it gets difficult, at least I guess for me, because I can't really follow
Right.
what's going on, and to be honest, I don't get to look at these emails like a lot during the day. I'm
And
looking at
sometimes you get
the
more
work
multiple
emails
strings.
and everything.
Mm.
So
So it's
I'm
getting
wondering,
confusing.
you know, how to approach communication differently if there's a way, whether it be, I don't know.
Did everyone
Short
get the
meetings.
Google Doc? Because that's what I did in the beginning, was here's a Google Doc with all the ideas, so we could all collaborate electronically, and then I said, Sue, who would like to help keep track, and Sue volunteered, so.
Well, look, like, what the idea was that
Yeah.
some things could probably be on the town calendar if it's something sponsored by
Oh,
the
right.
conservation board.
Mhm.
But if it's sponsored by like Newcastle Healthy Yards or something, I don't know that that would be on the town calendar because it's
Right.
not part of the town. I mean,
Yeah.
we're just all volunteers.
Right.
So what I was proposing is to have a calendar for Earth Month, and it would list each of the different items. We have a number of them already booked. And it would give enough information to the whoever is involved. It would be here, the pollinator pathways, maybe some other groups, like maybe the library, because they're a part of it. So as we find out more information, we put it all in that same calendar, and people can access it, and it could be, added to their calendar.
Right.
And the next step was going to be to start putting together information about each of the events. And just as an example, where is this? Kevin, for the Prune Sanctuary Nature Walk, he made a little flyer.
Right.
So that would be in with all of the other events, so we'd have an email that would list at the top, what are we doing, it's Earth Day, 50 years, so we're gonna have a month instead of a day.
Right.
And then each of the groups, we'd somehow have a flyer, or something that was, we may not have a picture of exactly what we're gonna do. One of them is a walk through, what is this one, North County Trail, family hike. So there it might be, we get a picture of the sign that's there, because we don't have pictures yet.
Right.
But try to, make people see what it is and tell them where it is and what time, and give them enough information so that it sounds really interesting. And it's kind of like what the Autobahn does, where, that, then the Sawmill River, where they send out, instead of just sending a calendar, they have pictures of what you're gonna do, like you're gonna have a bird talk and you're gonna do this. So each event would, be like in the order of what is happening, but give them enough visual information and to make it sound really interesting, which I think they're going to be.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's something, I'm pretty good at getting things pulled together. It's just in some instances, I'm gonna have to get information from people.
Right.
So that we have more details. I'm not sure if I know everybody who's claimed what. I mean, like you're Jessica Schuler, like just for an example, on the 1st of April, Jessica Schuler is gonna be at the Chat Pack. And then on the 4th, on a Saturday, it's gonna be a North County Trail family hike.
Right.
So those would be on there, and then the following
And those are things that obviously you found along the way, so to speak, like you didn't organize the hike,
I
it's
didn't-
gonna be.
no.
right,
No,
okay,
no,
okay,
it's just
yeah.
the calendar.
just
So-
the calendar, and then on the 11th is Kevin is going to do a nature scavenger hunt in Prune, which is here. And I mean, there's other ones, native plant family, what does that mean?
Where does this
I was
calendar
With
live?
all of these things
Oh,
on
it's a
the,
hike, yeah, it's a
Yeah,
hike.
with
that
all of
makes
these
sense.
things on the calendar, did the people sitting in this room come up with those events?
People have done that, and now we had the library person before.
Right.
So that would go on there, if the SAB is gonna do
Dennis
something.
is
Yeah, the
And
SAB
Dennis,
wants to
you're
do a
down
film.
here for the
22nd, right?
Right, and that'll be on the town calendar, cause
that would be on
They're
there, but
both,
still,
right.
we would have it,
Right.
Yeah, they could be in both, that's,
Yeah.
no,
yeah, we would have it on both
Where
places.
does this calendar live that you're working on, the inclusive one? Like, where is it
It's,
found?
Kent is doing it, he's, cause I don't know how to do it.
So
but
I'm just
it'll be
thinking, will
something,
it
it'll be,
for public consumption?
it's gonna be on, well, it's gonna be on Pollinator Pathways, ID, whatever it is online, because the Conservation Board doesn't have any way to kind of
But
make that happen, so
we
then
have
we
that,
would make it available to everyone on all of the groups that are
right,
currently involved.
Ivy has the town newsletter that goes out as well, and we can have even like a flyer form, not
Yeah.
all the information, but a little bit shorter with that, that can go up to hit people who don't necessarily, get the open up their newsletter online, but just put it at the library, put it here at town hall, put it at the
And
senior
also
center.
get it in the actual newsletter,
Yeah,
you know,
and also
comes
in
from
the
the town.
yeah.
Right.
But
And,
we can make a poster kind of it,
Yeah, and hit a lot of Facebook pages.
Right,
There's a lot of groups out there that would be interested.
right.
And again, once we get the flyers together, we'll put it out and,
Right,
you know, so.
and since Jessica's speaking on the 1st of April, so that's a chance that we'll be having refreshments in that, like a little reception there, and a chance to put out that information, so this is actually a way of kicking off the whole month and having that as this is what else you can be doing to celebrate Earth Month in Newcastle.
I love that idea, and I love the idea of having it in hard copy. I'm just wondering where it physically will be accessible. Like if I'm a resident of Newcastle and I wanna search
We could
online.
put it out on, we could put it on in the newsletter.
Well, can we put it on the
We could just-
Conservation Board website?
Yeah.
Could have, but then
So-
people don't really go there to look for it.
No, but just
You
if
could
they
put a
want,
link.
you could put a link. Yeah, no,
Somewhere
I think it
that's
should go be
searchable.
as widely distributed as
So
possible,
like for
but if
Bedford
someone's
Audubon,
looking.
we have monthly events every month,
That's what I
so
was,
I
yeah,
do,
that's
so
okay,
on our
yeah.
website,
I
like
like
I write up these, whatever. So we have the month of February, we have like a little description with the dates, the times, the
Yeah.
cost. And we house that on our website, but then we email, our monthly newsletter. But in this case, I wonder if housing it on the Conservation Board, or if the town is participating, in Earth Month, if all of these events on the calendar reside in one place, in Ivy's newsletter, it could be click here for all the events, so
Right.
people aren't necessarily going to that.
Right.
Just
Yeah.
because you need to have a place where it resides
Right, that's what I'm
electronically.
thinking, like somewhere that
And you
people
can
can
always
access it.
do a flyer with
Yes,
events
exactly.
to have.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
But it can reside on the town, right? On
You
the
have a-
Conservation Board website or
You
no?
have, you have a website and I'm like,
Yeah.
right, and then I don't
You
personally
manage
upload it, but I
Well,
could,
I-
I'm the one who
I don't,
communicates.
there's somebody in the town that
Here's the
runs it.
meetings
I just
for
was
2020,
looking at it and
this is the list, these have to be
Yeah.
uploaded, and then I guess we call Sullivan, whatever, and
Yes,
that
So
kinda
we
gets
would
uploaded.
create something and then give it to you to give to somebody to put on the website.
Right, if it would be, right, if it's a listing, if it's something that's more interactive, then I'm not sure how that works in the world of
Well,
IT,
it might
and
be,
make sure it's
like-
virus free or whatever, but yeah, I guess I'm the mechanism for that.
I think there would just be links, so for the library event, right, is part of that, and she said she wants people to sign up for the bird walk.
Right.
So then there's like, click here to register, and then it probably goes to her, right? So whoever's managing
Right.
the event needs to be able to provide the info.
Isn't it at the library website? I mean, I'm a little
It
confused.
probably
No,
would be
probably
directed there.
Yeah.
It would be
That's the
directed
only
to the
way that makes
library.
sense.
So it's at the library.
Yeah, but they would have to give the information, create the flyer, and have the RSVP for the bird walk that
Right,
they're
right.
hosting.
But I assumed that was what they were doing.
They
It
are
is,
doing
yeah.
it, we're just saying we wanna
to
show a
it.
calendar that has all the
Every
events on
event
it.
for-
Some
for
events
Earth
will have
Month.
instructions, click here to register.
And then
They're
we go.
holding it at the library, they're gonna be
They're holding
housing
it
But
that.
I thought they were in charge of the registration.
They are.
They are,
are
but it
for
would be,
that
so it would
event.
be
They are,
click, it would
just
go
that
to
event.
them. Like if it's an email, it would just say
We're
click
just
here.
providing
Like-
isn't that kind
information.
of, wouldn't that kind of, I mean, I'm just wondering whether that would be a bit confusing, because the library has its own thing for registration, but then we're
It would
now
be the
in
same
your-
thing.
It
It
would
would
be
be
the
the
same
same
To
to
their
them.
registration link.
It's just a place to house though.
Yeah,
We
Big
would just
picture.
send it to
so unless you
them.
have two groups at two different sites.
No,
No,
it's one
we all go to the
registration,
same
it's
place.
theirs.
Okay.
If she says, you have to email me to,
Right.
if Joan says you have to email me to register, it would be her email address for the
We would
registration.
use like pollinator pathways for, I guess, for stuff like at the first one on the, with what's her name?
Jessica
Jessica Schuler.
Yeah.
that one would go to someone here to sign up. So each group that is putting on an
If
event would go to them to get people registered, because otherwise, you have no idea if you're gonna have nobody or 100
Right.
people. So we try to get,
Like I'm doing an event at the Chat Pack for another organization that I'm involved with.
Are you
and
having registration?
yeah, we say, event is free, RSV.
Please register.
Yeah,
Oh,
registration required.
and that's what
So we had
it's either
how many
free or it's,
people
you know,
are coming, you know?
Yeah.
So,
But that's the kind of information that we need to collect it all and
right.
get it in one place, and then we,
yes, exactly.
so that
No,
not
it's
everybody's trying
absolutely
to do something.
awesome.
Yeah.
So thank you for organizing that. So now that, so what did we decide? We're gonna put it on,
I mean, it should go on the Conservation Board website, I would think, if you guys have a specific calendar, that
Okay.
makes sense to me, yeah.
Yeah.
But
And
it
then-
could also go out to each of the members on the conservation board, I mean, to your, if you keep a calendar.
Right, and to all of the
Oh,
different
yeah.
organizations
yeah.
that we
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
It's just,
Oh,
it's
yeah,
just
yeah, yeah.
physical
Email.
housing,
With the physical
physical
housing,
digital
yes,
housing, can
yes,
you say it like
exactly.
that?
It's a way of promoting what
It is.
we're involved with
Yep.
yeah,
for that month, so anybody who wants to participate, we have all these events, families, grown-ups, whatever you want. It's all housed there with every day that there's something, and people can pick and choose, even though it's not the people sitting in this room running
Right.
the event.
Right, they can
exactly.
look at the calendar and
Exactly.
see,
Yeah.
you know,
Right.
we've
That's
got,
exactly it,
you know,
yeah.
which is a really nice
Exactly.
visual.
Yeah, and we can do these when we do events with the pollinator pathways and Newcastle Healthy Yards, we have like a whole bunch of different places where we put them, like in the library and
Sure.
stores and,
Yeah.
we've
Oh,
got
yeah,
like a whole
that's
list, so.
You could do, if if that flyer were housed on a Google Drive and you have your conservation page, like click here for the flyer, so you don't have all the details.
Right.
So other
Just
people can
share.
even
Yeah.
print it out and
Exactly.
True, yeah.
share it with
Sure,
other communities.
yeah.
Definitely.
So at this point though, would you say with respect to your calendar, there's, like, we're good in terms of, there's nothing additional? Cause I have something additional, that's why I printed it.
Still
out.
growing.
I'm asked-
All right.
Right, but it could be static is my point, but, you know, is it some, I mean, I know we only meet once a month, so that becomes an issue, cause it's like, I can't wait 3 weeks, that's reasonable. So what is the best way then now at that point to communicate it, cause you know if you send it as an email, which is fine, you're gonna get 6 answers potentially, or
Is this for
So
an
that's
event?
back to the
that
For an
you're-
general
event,
question.
It goes
so
back
if it's
to
an
that,
event, it
right.
should go to Sue.
what
if
would
it's
be the
for-
best, right,
For an event, should go to Sue.
if it's an event for Earth Month, Sue gets the date,
Right.
any information, if there's a
Right.
flyer.
Okay, and then if there's these danglings, like here's a good one,
And
for
actually, can I just
example.
amend that
Go
for
ahead.
1 second, just a thought?
Yeah.
So, just for the way all of us to keep in the loop, if it's sent to Sue, because we know she kind of owns the entry, and CC the rest of us, so we're all kept up to date, even though you're the one enters. So this way, there's a
right,
collective sense of what's happening, as well as someone who's designated to enter it onto the
And
calendar.
don't always should.
Sometimes
Yeah,
it's hard to
don't
go
have- yeah.
backwards and forwards.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
part
No.
of the
I know, me
problem.
too.
Part
Responsible
of
for
the
each
problem
event.
I see is, it's just so many emails and it's backwards and forwards and you don't know who was the
Right.
last person,
So
and
we'll
I
do-
find it quite frankly very confusing.
Yeah, and we'll get to, I think that's a very good point, and so we can talk about that next. But Dennis, you have another event for Earth Month?
Jill, Mr. Latimer is interested.
Oh.
Big Clean Westchester, you know, they're basically looking to pick up trash.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
Oh, yeah. Right.
cleanup
that's-
events there between April 1st and May 17th, we hope. So, as
We
I
do that anyway.
kind of said to Jill,
BAB.
We often have
right.
that.
BAB does it,
Yeah.
so are
and
they
BAB
doing?
to me though, and I could be wrong, like I said, I think of 2 camps, like kind of what Kevin presented is kind of like my camp, and I think of that as our camp, you know? The other camp is, you know, you're walking pavement, you're going behind stores, you're going on the other side of the bridge over the railroad tracks where, you know, there's always a couple, I notice when I'm walking around, so, I mean, you're not getting hit with multi-floor rows, you know, you're not, it's a cleaner event in terms of not necessarily what you're picking up, but your surrounding environs, you know? So, So that's kinda just how I
You mean like
couched it
garbage
to Jill,
pickup?
yeah,
Okay,
Yeah.
you know,
alright.
Just
Like,
call
we-
it garbage.
Right.
Well, that's
Sorry.
what it is.
That's what it
You know,
is.
the-
refuse,
garbage
solid
pickup.
waste,
So they do that-
MSW,
The
whatever you wanna
BAB
call it, right?
does that.
But we have a cleanup day
I don't know
every
who
year, I don't know
BAB
when
does.
it
It's a
is.
traditional
Right.
meet to
Yeah.
the street.
And
They
is
have
that,
this
is it between
thematic
April
days.
first and May
But
seventeenth?
this one is
I
gonna,
don't
needs to be
know.
the
I have
first
no
2
idea.
weeks of April,
So,
is what he said.
so you're telling me every year the conservation board has a cleanup day?
Oh, no,
No,
it's the,
Okay.
no, it's the,
Yeah.
it might be the BAB that
Right.
does it, it's one of the
See,
towns,
they have that,
it's not us, but.
they have the
they've
town
had it a long
cleanup
time.
day that
Yeah.
they correspond
because every year.
with the hazardous waste
Yeah.
and
Right.
the
Oh,
shredder.
right, the
Yeah.
disposing
Shredder.
of
And they
that,
have
yeah.
they have the
Town
big
cleanup
orange,
day.
yeah, town cleanup day.
Yeah.
Right.
They have the big
Town
orange
cleanup
bags.
I used to
Okay.
take my
Yeah,
Girl
and
Scouts
they,
out
the
to do
people,
that.
they go back and they organize, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, they have their volunteer contacts that they do that. And BAB does sometimes change the messaging. I know that a few years ago they started with the neat to the street idea. But, so I don't know if they're doing something different for, the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, or if it's going to be what they had been doing for the last couple of years.
Right.
But I think they do organize that, that event with the, giving out the bags.
Yeah.
Orange
and-
bags
they
and
do.
stuff.
But that-
So the question is, for us,
Yeah.
if it's in April, we wanna put it on this calendar.
It's,
right.
It's
it's
town cleanup
between
day.
April
I
first
know.
and May seventeenth.
Dennis,
mean,
I
if
think
you
they,
choose
I
the
think somebody told me that they had already scheduled the date.
There is a date,
There is a-
BAB has a date.
There's already a date, so would you mind
Right.
communicating with the BAB
Yeah.
and just asking them what the date is and what their messaging
Their next
is?
meeting, which I thought was gonna be next Monday, actually became today, because they had to quickly decide on the plants and the pots, and now we have to send out, she's gonna email me, Phyllis, that list, so that I could quickly just write up some memos and shoot them out, and so we can get
It's okay,
the
but,
number of bids,
wait.
and then we could
Yeah,
select,
go
and
for- and
then
then I
boom,
have
so.
yeah,
You go first.
so if you could,
That threw me off, I
if
wasn't
you-
expecting them to meet today.
well, make sure that they're not like, invasive, but obviously, but so if you could find out the
They're
date.
carnivorous, all of them,
Yeah.
sorry.
Usually in
I'd like,
May, isn't it?
no, I think it's in April.
All these
The
meetings
town
like
cleanup
that.
day?
I think
Well,
it's April too.
Okay.
I think,
Really?
Dennis, all we need is the
Sure.
date, cause BAB is gonna do, it does it, I
Right,
think they already have a date,
right,
and if we get the date, we put it on this calendar, and we'll just sort of say it's another Earth Month thing.
right,
Yeah.
and so that with the date, you would be within shouting distance of BAB members, or we would look to do our own
No,
thing?
No, they would do it.
So in
yeah.
other words,
So we're not
we
doing
just,
it.
no,
on the calendar.
we're just gonna put it on the calendar.
Okay.
So in other words, if you were just a regular community member without any awareness of anything,
all the
you would
boards.
say, oh, Earth Month, Earth Day is the 50th anniversary. Huh, how interesting. I wonder if my town is doing anything about Earth Day. And they would find this calendar somehow, with it would be in the newsletter. And you'd say, wow, Newcastle is doing, there's 20 things going on in town this month.
Exactly.
Some of them are done by the Conservation Board. Some of them are done by the Girl
Healthy
Scouts.
yard, yeah.
Some of them are done by, the vine cutters. Some of them are done by the BAB.
The library.
The library,
So
the
it's a
school.
community thing.
So everybody is doing a little something to celebrate
Right.
In our
Earth
community.
Day in our community,
But
which
to that
is a
point,
month.
we really should have we should let Ivy know and other town boards so that we can
Yes.
have whatever events that they might be
They send
planning
things
together.
our way.
Yes.
So how do we want that to happen? Is that
Yeah, I mean-
and there's just a communication thing, just a quick
Right.
email.
I
So
mean, this is, George wants to pick up trash, that's
But I'm
that's
not
all.
talking,
this is.
Yeah.
BAB does that.
Right.
Just one
Right.
clarifying question, so is the BAB, we know does this all the time, is he asking for something separate and above from that?
That's what I was
Or,
But he's not getting a separate
So
and
I
above
don't
now.
think that all
We
towns
already
do that.
have one,
And so,
so since we already have an
We have
annual
one.
something, it fits in,
Right.
and it meets his requirements
Yes.
of what he's trying to accomplish.
right.
And
Yeah,
close
he's
enough
asking
is
for-
probably,
By coordinating cleanup events in their communities between April 1st and May 17th. So it doesn't have to necessarily happen on a day, he's providing a window of about 6 weeks.
Oh, yeah, we'll cover that.
So-
So the BAB's annual event will meet this,
Do you-
will fit in.
Well, it'll meet the date thing, but I guess if,
there's a whole bunch of history.
I mean,
we should
like
have,
I
we
said,
should
my
have communication
mind
to
is
the
more
town
to,
Yes,
and town
this was
boards.
my idea, right? So
so
I'm at
that
Glacier,
gets to the question.
and I'm looking at the trees, right, and the person who planted them goes and inspects them, and obviously I've gotten to know people and their dogs, and I see them, and it's always good. And, you know, they share with me that, you know, we like walking in Glacier because, you know, there's glass at Whippoorwill Park and I don't want their paws to get cut, whatever. And so that's where my mind went when I got George's thing. Not so much the BAB and the orange bags and the street thing, but it's like, right, you know, like when I'm getting cut up last week, you know, pulling the dog poop frisbee out of the, you know, multi-floor rows, I'm like, the only way this got there is somebody to do this, and I just hate looking at that. Whether I'm an employee or not, I just, everywhere I go, I hate looking at that.
Yeah.
So that kind of was my focus, is that I don't necessarily think we would, you know, come up with a record amount of trash, but it would just be like, you know, kind of similar to what I'm trying to do with respect to the trail maintenance, you know, identify where trees are, it's the same concept, it's like, you know, it just, by any of us, like if it's just like during our normal course of business, I'm not asking you on that day, pick up all the broken glass, but it's like, you know, Dennis mentioned this at the last meeting, and I know that BAB's doing this, but maybe we could do something at one of the parks, and even dovetail it to something that's already on the calendar, and then it kind of becomes part of that.
If you wanna add another thing to the.
Yeah,
It's just,
yeah.
you just need a person who'll be there to help direct it,
Right,
so.
right, okay.
That's, if somebody,
So
if
you
you wanna
Okay.
do that, that's,
Okay.
why not? I mean, I think that's
That's
amazing.
great.
Okay,
And
You
it's a
might
nice
get one
complement
person,
to
you
the
might get
traditional trash.
Epic committee, you might get a bunch.
Or even if you
Yeah.
did, you know, if you
Might
take
get
the
a
day
lot of
that
dog
BAB
You might get
is
a lot of dog
doing it,
walkers, that's a
you
great
might wanna
idea.
say, like,
Yeah.
you know, address, like,
Yeah.
the park cleanup.
yeah,
You
make it, you know, I'm not, I mean, you know,
Yeah, clean up
to
our
make it work,
parks. They have
just
that
pick,
clean up
we'll
our
pick
parks
one.
I mean, look, like I walk
Yeah.
around in my neighborhood and I often will bring like an extra bag.
Oh, I go several
Yeah.
times a year on my
Yeah.
road.
Yeah, and I'll just pick
I
up
bring
all
my
the like
Yeah, my
plastic.
world
bag
of
in my
retirement's
gloves.
pretty much laid out, I'll do the same thing, I'm the guy who picks up whatever in the street.
I know,
That's
I
always
think-
my-
I think that's,
Because
a-
I
I
don't
think
wanna
it's
look
a
out
great
for this
idea
for
to
my
have.
house. It's like,
both.
you
I
crazy.
know beer bottles.
Why not,
in my house
yeah,
'cause we have
why
a
not
whole
have
wall.
the
Basic thing,
let
if I
people
could
choose which
Because
they might
Because
like to
you know what I'm
do.
saying, cause BAB's
Absolutely.
not walking Whippoorwill.
No, no,
Park.
no, no,
Yeah,
no,
Okay,
no,
now
no.
I understand, it just,
Yeah.
I understand now what you're saying.
No,
It didn't- yeah.
I'm not always clear,
No, it took, but,
understood.
and are you gonna do the tree, that tree
Yeah, I'm happy
presentation?
to do that. I'm happy,
So
I
you
just
just
gonna
have to
take a
choose a
day.
date and a venue, if you're gonna,
Yeah.
you could do it here, or if you wanted to try for
Yeah.
Trap Pack, whatever.
I'm happy to, I mean, I could, you know, do the trap pack, should we pick a date? I mean,
I think you should just pick what date works
look
for
at the
you.
calendar, so
Yeah.
that calendar that you were just talking about, where is it physically now that I could look at?
Right here.
It's in your head. It's right here.
So is it shareable from your, can you share it
Not-
with us in
Not
the
yet, it's
meantime?
not yet,
No,
not yet, she's working,
Okay,
they're working.
is there a list of dates, like in
I
the,
could just
I
put
have
this
a list of
together.
dates on that Google Doc
oh, it's on there,
so
so
far,
yours corresponds
but
totally
it
with
might not be
Sue's?
completely
I don't
up to
think
date.
I don't think it's.
Well, I'll look at
They're
this
the same.
before we
Okay.
leave today and I'll pick
What
it
else
up.
we got?
And I'll ask.
Yeah, I gotta
go.
I know, it's getting to that time,
Oh, one more thing, so we weren't talking about.
wait, let's make
yeah.
a decision before
Oh,
we
yeah,
move on.
okay.
So Dennis, do you,
Oh, yeah.
I don't wanna task you with it,
No,
but to talk to Ivy, or should somebody from the conservation board wanna write an email to the other boards about what's happening?
Well, maybe, you know, I know Ivy must be very busy, but perhaps
It's just
I should
enough way.
have a little meeting with her to see what's going, you know.
well,
No.
you're gonna have that opportunity
I'm
on
sorry.
the 24th, or is that too late, I mean,
Is there a town
No.
board work session tomorrow that one of us can go to and just give them a heads up? And
24th.
I think we told her
25th.
already.
We
We
did
told
tell
Ivy.
her, yeah,
You know what, I'll volunteer, I'll do a draft of an email
okay,
from us, I guess, to all the
Conservation.
other boards to say, we're doing this, we'd like to know if anybody else is doing anything.
keeping a master
master
calendar.
calendar.
if you have anything you'd like us to add to the calendar or
Right.
Okay.
anything.
So I will
Yeah.
volunteer to do
I can
that.
help you
Yeah,
with
that's a
that.
reach out, yeah.
That's
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So that way we'll get that at least out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
No
you, so,
worries.
and then, yeah, and then I'm happy to work on that with you, or run, you know, if you wanna run it by me or whatever.
That's great.
Okay,
For
perfect.
tomorrow morning, I'll send a list of what is on the calendar now, so that
Thank you,
everybody
that's
has
Sue,
it.
that's really
We
helpful.
just don't have the calendar built.
I understand,
that's-
I totally understand, thank
There's
you.
there's a number of events here.
I think it's great, we've got
It's so
some,
great.
Thank you, Sue.
yeah, thank you. Okay,
Okay, and just, yeah, cause I don't wanna have everybody walk out yet, so this is the replacement discussion for Chip, I mean, so, you know,
no, no,
so I believe
I mean, I don't think so.
what was communicated to me, because I think we initially got your application, and then Jill was like, well, we need to post it, cause that's just how it goes, like, understood. But I don't think I didn't get the impression that there was any other response, so, you know, I assume you've met her, I assume you know her, in other words, so the point being is that, from here, if everybody's cool with it, then it's me going back to Jill.
Yeah.
And then, in fact, I just got the
Are you sure?
resolution.
'Cause I can leave if we're,
happy.
but we're talking about.
It's like, just to let you know how it goes, right, today, somebody forwarded to me the formal resolution of Chip's resignation. So like, cause I had to forward his email to Jill a few weeks ago, and then all of a sudden, this kinda came back to my inbox, and I'm like, okay, that's how the process works, so it's the same in reverse.
Okay.
Be a point,
And then I think you might have to go to a town board meeting for them to
I
like.
believe there is
Or you
like an
just have a quick
introductory.
look,
Yeah.
yeah.
Sometimes they just like rubber stamp it, but it's
So I
rubber
could-
stamp it anyway, but. they're
Yes,
not gonna-
yeah, you
I
don't
mean,
have to worry
should they
about, right.
contact me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying, my point is that tomorrow, I'll, amongst some other things, just bring this up to Jill, that, Susan came to the meeting and things went quite well, and she made lemon bars and everybody was thrilled, and I'm saying, all good,
Multi-talented.
so,
Okay.
okay,
alright.
alright,
Can I,
So-
can we come to resolution on the communication piece?
Yeah.
Like, maybe part of it, to the point about all these different streams, is making sure the subject line is distinct. Like, in other words, this is about the water bottles, so we all at least know that that's the.
Earth Day events, Earth
Yeah.
Day
Yeah,
month or
exactly,
something.
so we
And
can
I-
at least streamline topics, I mean, I don't know what other ideas.
and I mean, to be fair, I'm guilty of, cause when I get to a point where it's like, cause I know like, when now I have to write something, I'm always afraid of what I write getting a life of its own. So I know I tend to be longer and I tend to be more, and this
Thorough.
is my justification for it, because I
Very
just
thorough.
can't have 3 statements with my name on it, fly out there, and then I'm like, yeah, it has no context and what happens. So I try not to do that, I try to refrain until, because sometimes, like that's why I brought this one here, like where it's like, I agree with the state parks when I read it in their native plant policy, but I'm, like I said, it's like, it is good in policy, but maybe let's just make that advisory, or keep it as a, cause then suddenly if we have to, adhere to some sort of legal standard,
It was just asking the
Yeah.
question,
Yeah,
do we have
yeah.
it? I wasn't
Yeah.
even saying
Yeah.
let's do it, it was
Right,
just, do
right.
we have this in place? That was my question, it wasn't,
And-
it wasn't a.
And I've shared with people who've sent in applications
Yeah.
for tree removals or wetlands, and I've asked, do you recommendation for plantings, and I'm like, well, yeah, appendix A unfortunately is not included in chapter 121 online, but I have appendix A, and I'll be happy to email
send
it to
it
you,
to
and yeah,
So-
so we try.
And I've been guilty of that stuff, and even with the goals and stuff, I do have version control problems, so I'm gonna make sure that the whatever's up on I'm gonna put it on Google Drive, because
Okay.
everybody has access.
I've been there too, it's a frustrating world.
Yeah, right, so what I'll put it all up there,
happens to
and
me.
then that'll
Yeah.
be where we'll hold it, because again, everybody, when you
Yeah,
go
that
in,
makes
it
sense.
saves it, and
It
it's the
saves
last
it.
one.
Yeah.
Because Sue asked me for an edit, and then I really got lost. You asked me for an edit, and then I didn't know where to put it. So
Yeah.
like,
Right.
I really feel like I don't know what is the most recent one. So I will take what I think is the most recent one, and I will ask everybody, please, one more time,
Sure,
go to this document and put in where you think the change should be.
okay.
And then it's there.
And then it's there.
Yeah, I did
Right.
that, I think yesterday.
I know, but I couldn't find it, like if
Yeah.
it was attached or where,
Oh, I just put it in the
in
document.
a Google Doc?
Yeah.
Oh, you just put it in there,
You
okay.
could look at a version history in the Google.
In the
Oh yeah,
Google
maybe
Doc,
that's what I
yeah.
was missing, okay,
Just look-
alright, I thought it was an
You could put on,
attachment, I was like,
file version
Oh, no, I
history,
just-
you could see all
Oh.
the dates that
Yeah,
ended.
but
oh
you
yeah,
just type
okay,
it
so
in,
I'll
it's
try
there.
that.
Yeah.
So just a one thought too, because sometimes there's an email and some people are focused on it, and so it moves really quick.
Correct.
And like,
Then by the time you
others
get it,
might
it's
not
already
have even
done.
read it.
Yeah.
So maybe if we're sensitive to giving like a goal point, if everyone
Oh,
could
let
read
us
this
know
by
by
next Friday.
Yeah.
February 10th.
Okay, yeah.
Right, or if we don't hear
Yeah.
from you by
Because
February,
not
that makes
everybody's
sense.
immediate.
Because I think there's
Yes.
a lot of
Yeah.
back and forth, and it depends on if you're even looking at it to begin with.
Right, if you
And
miss
sometimes
it,
if you look at your emails top down or bottom up, and then I'm
Yeah.
like, oh my god, I
already
answered that,
did
and
that,
it's
I
like
did
5
that too.
people after me said something different. One other thing that I wanted to ask about, when we were talking, I don't know if it was this guy or Kevin, but there are all these kind of cool things like, are we on the Greenway? Or remember we had a
the
question
Tree
about Tree
City.
City? It would probably behoove us to know all the like designations that we actually have
Right.
that are related to that category.
Right.
Like, you know, are we a tree city?
I believe that it was taken away.
You think it was
Okay,
taken
so
away?
Ivy said yes, but then
Somebody
someone
said
said
no.
no, so
Right.
I don't know.
And if you want to answer that question, DEC Forester actually called me today with respect to our application, and the only thing that we don't have is a town board resolution dated from 2019.
Oh.
So, but we have one for 2020. So
Oh,
after I got off the phone, I spoke. Kellen and I were talking because he's the one who helped me with the application, and I think it was I might be wrong. It wasn't Tree City. It was Tree City. Is it the Arbor Day Foundation that designates? Yes. So it was them. Okay. So we're just gonna do it this year.
oh,
Okay.
excellent.
The only thing that we need to focus on is, because we had everything other than a time machine. If we had a time machine and we could have went back and done the
we would have
resolution,
done
it
it.
was done. Because he's like, did you do any programs with plantings? I'm like, we put 50 trees in a park. He goes, that's great. You know, and so stuff like that. So now for this year, and as I was saying to Kellen, they don't have to be, you know, 2.5-inch caliber, 14-foot evergreens, you know, they could be this high, you know, and if it's a tree species, it counts. So that just becomes, it's only February, but that kind
So
of
you're
becomes.
supposed to do it, you have to get re-certified every year?
Well, I believe since certification, I think had kind of ended or ran out,
Right.
we're kind of reapplying.
Okay.
So, and that's why we lost from last year, just because by the time we brought it and by the time of the resolution, and that was George's suggestion, he says, you know, it would be a bit of a finagle, but you'd have to like go back in time, and you know, Kellen and I were like, it's kind of hard to get something dated last year from everybody that just got sworn in on Monday, you know, it's like, I'm not broaching that subject, you know, so.
Okay,
that's
so
a
we're gonna
wonderful
be
thing
at
to
Tree
advertise.
City 2020.
Let's put that in the newsletter.
And newsletter, and also like
will apply,
Earth Day,
yes.
Earth Month,
Yeah.
you know? So, and then also the Hudson River Valley Greenway.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look into that.
I don't know,
sure.
yeah,
Like,
that
or,
works.
and again, like what other things are there that are like
There's
that?
the
Like,
Bee City, there's a whole thing about
Bee
Bee City.
cities.
are we a bee
No.
city?
Probably.
I don't think so, it's a newer thing, something.
Okay.
But to your point, it's on the list of could we be on it?
Could we be on
That's a
it,
great
right? Like, I
result.
mean, and if there are those things that, like some of the things, all you have to do is like sign up and you are.
Right.
And I mean, we are mostly green.
Yeah.
You know, here, so if there's any greeny kind of thing, like, we might as well, like, have it, and then we could promote it, you know, I think that, but we should know, you know, so anyway, if you guys run across any of those kind of certification names, and it's something, you know, if you read about it, and you go like,
Start a
oh,
list.
yeah,
Yeah.
Start a list. You know,
Google Doc,
on a Google
put it on,
Doc or
you know, we
something.
could just
Start
at
a
least
list.
research it, and if we are it, we'll promote it, and if we're not it, we can look into being
Maybe
one
doing
of
it.
them, right, you know,
I think that's a good idea.
right?
Okay.
And people love things like that. So in other words, if there's something we have to do that the community has to commit to
Yeah.
to
Oh,
get
yeah.
there,
Right.
then that's a nice incentive.
Well,
Yeah,
I think
it's a
Tree
great
City, we
outreach.
get a sign.
Yeah,
please.
We
Oh,
get a
yeah. Get a
sign
sign.
that you can put at one of our multiple entrances to town. Have to choose one, but you do get a sign.
Right,
I
and
remember
I
the
would
sign,
like,
but
I think Karen had mentioned, you know,
Took it away.
just from my personal experience since our last meeting, you know, you talked about like a welcome basket or something from a real estate, you know,
Oh,
for
yeah,
people moving
yeah.
to town.
Yeah.
You mentioned that. One of the things you probably wanna put in there is that you regulate trees under chapter 121, because the next t-shirt I'm gonna print for this town is, I'm sorry we moved here from Brooklyn, we didn't know, as the chainsaws are going.
Oh,
So,
my
yeah.
gosh.
Yeah.
No, that is what's
And
happening.
that
Oh,
was,
Yeah, we
That's
really
definitely
get the
a
word out.
newsletter.
so he's gonna apply.
That should be a
Then-
news.
That should be a
the
newsletter.
They were
town
crappy
newsletter.
condition.
That should be in every newsletter, in other words, a
Trees, but
constant
I told him,
reminder
you gotta get
of
me
this,
an
that there's a
application.
shortage.
It's
That's
gonna
also
do it
like
and et cetera,
disturbed
so.
soil and
Yeah.
heading off the problem with invasives.
Yes.
Because this is something
That should be in, the town.
and this is for the realtors, because there used to be a literal basket that you got, and now you don't. But this should be a conversation with them on that, because that's exactly your target audience, and the way the tree code is, we're so fortunate to have the tree code that we have. The problem is that people are either unaware, but they don't want to make themselves aware of it, and it requires a neighbor. It puts the onus on a neighbor to say, that is within a restricted setback zone. And then that, cause who's going in your backyard?
Right.
But at the point of purchase is the ideal time to say, this is so lucky
So-
that our town
Yeah,
values
there's-
our trees.
There's two things then. Oh,
I'm
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
No, but there's two things. I think maybe if it's in the town e-newsletter, but maybe the conservation board should just send a letter to all the
Yeah.
real estate agencies in town saying, "Are you aware? Is that not?"
No, I just wanted to say, a week and a half ago, I met with two realtors from Houlihan Lawrence as part of the Newcastle Healthy Yards to find out what we can give them to get to like head people off with the pass before they start signing up for spraying and all that stuff. And they came up with so much information, they're 100% behind it. They've invited us to come to Houlihan Lawrence and give a presentation, because they have every Tuesday morning they have a meeting.
That's
So they
awesome.
would like us to come and talk to them, and they also said they would introduce us to a realtor in every office so that we could do that.
Oh,
So
so can you add on the
rock
tree
star.
stuff? Yeah,
Yeah.
the code.
well,
that's law.
it was all
Will they
gonna
be
be
serving
how
women
to
bars
how to
if it's a
hail
breakfast meeting?
what not to do,
No,
Yes,
what
yeah.
to do.
Might
I'll
as
sneak
well
in.
bring that
Yeah.
also other
Yeah.
piece.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, no,
Oh,
that's-
and the buffer, the zone, the thing that
Uh-huh.
that's
Buffer,
weird.
the landscape
Planting on the
buffer.
line,
Yeah.
along the lines.
And not using the pesticides
Of
and the
course.
herbicides and
Yeah.
not cutting down the trees and
Especially during
Oh,
nesting
One of the
Speaking of
really
trees-
interesting things that Sue learned is that this is what was our fantasy for Newcastle Healthy Yards, because we were thinking, couldn't you try to market a healthy yard as a more
Yes.
expensive?
Yes.
Right.
And they were actually saying that the millennials are asking for healthy yards,
want
they're
healthy
looking for
yards.
properties
That's
like that.
But the
Interesting.
older people moving in are just like, I just want it mowed
It's an
and,
interesting generational.
I wanna also
Develop.
say,
Very
you know, Victoria, I've learned about your you always talk about the snags and stuff. So Dennis, remember my whole tree, I had these two trees that were on easements, is that what they were?
Yeah, I drove
And
by today.
one was on one
so,
side of my
yeah.
yard with my one neighbor, and then the other one was on the other side of my yard with another neighbor. So Dennis came in, put the orange tape around them. The first one got cut down and I was like not there, it was gone, right, like done.
Is that the
Like
one by the wall?
the one by the wall on the corner. And I was like, it was like gone,
Done.
done.
Right.
But the other one that's between our two houses, I caught them and I said, I want a snag.
Yep.
So Missy looked up how tall does a snag need to be, because my neighbor was worried about it falling, because parts were tumbling off and stuff. And so we left it like, I don't know, 30,
10
20,
feet.
20 feet. No, it was more than that
I
actually.
don't remember
Because it was
what
actually really high. He lifted up a big stick and it's like, high. So, but I was gonna say, those guys, Asplub,
Yes,
Yeah.
are the
The
ones
A.
who do the thing. They don't know about snags.
None
Like,
of them do.
Oh,
so we had to tell them.
Oh,
so like
so
the
you're
one
right.
that was on the
You
other
should also
side,
email all
I
the
didn't really
companies.
need that thing cut all the way down. I mean, it was like not in
I always
anybody's
do
way.
snacks.
I know.
No,
I get
yeah.
affiliated.
I
I
know,
know.
exactly, it's a wonderful.
We have, yeah,
So how do we
all sides is our
educate
person.
those?
Yeah, so I mean, maybe, I don't know how we,
Well, you're in a unique situation, the tree that you're talking
Yeah.
about, because typically, and Karen had alerted me too, like when Con Ed sometimes leaves a stick, it's
Yeah.
not necessarily a snag. For us, kind of the reason we're dealing with the right-of-way trees is because, DPW, it's kind of that,
Yeah.
it's like, we don't want it in the road, we don't want it this,
Right.
so, to leave something behind that's kind of closer to the roadway,
Right.
sort of,
I
that's
get
less
that.
like,
yes,
yours was a unique situation,
Yeah, I
because
know.
it was like an easement right away, but it was how many feet up your driveway,
right.
like it was
Right.
like, so, if it does tip, it's not even gonna damage the road. It
exactly.
won't
No, I
be in the
understand.
road,
I just didn't know like how to
So that's a unique
communicate to them.
situation,
Right.
that was all, yeah.
But I feel bad,
No, don't feel bad.
But I do feel bad.
You say
You know
this.
how
Well, one, I got
You got
50% of them.
One is
No,
better than
one
none.
of them though was all done. That was gone.
One is better than none.
Do you know how many times I've run out during nesting season as they're trimming the branches? Like, are there any nests in the tree?
Oh,
You're supposed to look.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
that's
yeah,
our
yeah,
that's
yeah.
our federally
And I go,
protected,
okay, I'm gonna
okay.
believe
Well,
you
would know.
looked. I have to tell myself you looked.
Right.
Well, they were at our property last week, and I saw them, so it was one of those really cold days, so I put on my coat and I went out and I said, "Hi, are you gonna be trimming these?" And I talked to them, they were very nice, they explained what they were gonna do, cause in the past, they've come and like chopped out the center of the
Yeah.
tree and left the branches on two sides, and you know, they were okay, and they said that, you know, if there's a problem and the boss says they didn't take enough, they'd come back the next day, but they were actually very, you know, and I
That's
stood
good to
there for the
hear.
whole time, I
It's
just went out and, you know, talked to them and it was very nice.
Is there a way, is there a way that we could, I mean, this is a, I
I
think
think the point is just talking to people is,
Yeah.
is a
Yeah.
good
But it
idea.
also
Is there any
depends on who you're
organized-
talking to.
I'm just
Because I've
wondering if there's
gone
an
out to speak to
organized
people,
way.
And
Is
they
there-
just take the whole tree down.
Is there any organized way that we can talk to those folks, right? So we know that the company contracted through Con Ed, et cetera. Can we have them come to a meeting with us? In other words, because it's just so ad hoc, right? It's which one of us is gonna see something
Right.
horrifying and run out and it's too late? Is there any organized way
I
that we
think
could have?
for us and Olmsted,
ISA, I don't
that's a
know.
possibility. For Con Ed and Asplund, I would say not.
If they're in our
Absolutely
town,
not.
we
Yeah.
couldn't
We could
say that
start-
they need to
No,
have a
maybe just
conversation
start
with
with
us?
one.
No, because
Yeah.
the whole deal is that Con Ed had issues years ago with a huge blackout, and ever since then, they
Yeah.
have to follow certain protocols, because they do not wanna be fined by the state.
Yeah.
So they've gone overboard.
And now they're doing it for free and everyone's saying, oh,
Cut.
great, take it for free then. Yeah, I mean, it's.
In all defense, what they did was they reduced the number of their line cutters as a way to reduce labor costs. So the problem is, they know full well that if there's a widespread storm, that they don't have the labor and they have to send them up move them from part of the country, and
Right.
I'm probably being recorded. But so, you know,
but I
so,
mean,
Yeah, you do
so
see
they,
a lot of trucks that are not Con Ed when there's a.
Yeah.
yeah,
When there's
Yes,
disaster,
exactly.
but that's the
they
way
had to more aggressively trim, because they, you know, they're trying to head off a future storm problem. They've always trimmed trees. It's only become a bigger problem in more recent years when it's become more aggressive.
But right, those trees that you see formally where, you know, I know they still hand out that flyer where you see, you know, like you were talking about, like, you know,
They
Yeah.
make it
Through the
impossible
middle
for
and
the
whatever.
tree to survive.
you don't see as much of that going forward. I
I
just
hope
see
not. That's
buzz,
the most
buzz,
exactly-
They cut it to the
logs
crop.
being
Well,
put on, like, oh, this is
Actually,
logging this,
just to
yeah.
end this, we just had Con Ed or Asplund or whatever in the fall, okay, when they left like that totem pole thing.
Yeah, yeah.
I just got a card again, they're coming again.
Oh, yeah?
Yes, and I'm thinking, what could have happened between, I mean, it's a little bit I think overkill, and I'm sorry, but I do think it is related to this particular incident where Con Ed had a huge issue because they failed to respond within a certain time, and ever since then, we've had this issue, and they
Right.
just keep cutting.
It's almost like
And
saying
the
they
town
made-
needs to step in and say, we don't want this.
Yeah, I really
But
think
they're
we need
somewhat
to do something.
powerless, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Is that
That's the
really true?
problem.
Can we really not say that that the town wants to have a
We can
conversation?
try.
Yeah,
But, I
I
mean,
would
at
have
the
to
end
go
of the
to
day-
Jill with that and say, you know, I can't necessarily.
It's not a
tell you
hostile
that.
conversation.
I'm sorry we're
but-
leaving.
Yeah.
No, I know, this was a long one.
Yeah.
I know.
Thanks, it was a
No,
great
but it was
meeting
good.
though,
There was
really
a lot of
helpful.
information.
Right, so
Between
just
everybody.
one final thing down the
Yeah.
topic of,
No,
we're trying to put together a Girl Scout planting project at Glacier of
Okay.
Pussy Willows.
Oh,
I know,
did
you
you
just
want to
imagine the photo op,
Oh
just
my
someone
gosh.
planting the little ones.
Yes.
don't
So-
put them at the top of the hill, they're
No,
not.
so that's
Okay.
actually my question to you and Missy on where we should be, and it's also called, if you see the Phragmites nearby, cut it, stomp it, break the stalk, this is a bully plant.
Nuke the frag, yep.
But, so, could there be some guidance just generally where it should be and definitely where it should not be type of thing if we're looking at about 15 Girl Scouts?
How many trees?
Well, that depends, I'm literally buying the little sticks from DEC.
You're just
Yeah.
getting like the whips.
Yeah, willows
I
are
feel
willows
like
are
I
good
have to
for
mention
that,
one
yeah.
thing.
So
The
they'll
gentleman-
plant with
The
that,
town
so
board.
tiny little ones, little
Right.
hands going in, but where
Ask the
type of
town
thing.
board,
Around the
we go
pond.
before
But
that,
does
maybe
it
they can
matter
help
where
us.
it is?
I just, you know,
Should I not worry?
this is kind of a side
Okay, I won't
piece.
worry
Yeah,
then, okay.
I
But
mean-
that's okay to do this in Glacier.
I think
It
it
Yeah,
would be
of course.
approved by the
Yeah.
eyeball it.
Planting is.
So I
not
just
an
wanna
issue,
make
yeah.
sure that the town-based code, I actually went on my own behalf.
Oh, yes, that
to
meeting is
to
tomorrow.
talk more about it with, you know, to kind of
Oh, yes.
express my concerns. And one of the town board basically asked that conservation board collectively give our guidance and give it to them. So I know Dennis had written this note that if anyone wants to meet individually with Sabrina.
Oh, right, I'm sorry, it took me a second to know which one you were talking about.
But somehow, and they did extend the deadline, I think it was
I saw that.
February 7th, so there, if there's an opportunity for all of us to sit down, I don't know if our next meeting's gonna be before or after that new deadline, but to really give our feedback. Because they consider us an interested party, and there are some pieces, if you start delving into the documents,
No,
that
I
we
know,
might wanna
it's,
give.
it looks very
didn't
dense,
delve.
the
So maybe
document.
that, we should maybe start an email trail to talk about whether there are a few of us that wanna get together, just so we don't miss that
Like a
opportunity.
subcommittee or something, that's a good
Yes.
idea.
Yeah, so,
This is
I didn't
not
mean to jump
me
in,
as
but I
much,
just.
No,
but
no,
at
that's
least
good, cause I had
speaking with
forgotten.
the engineer, whatever,
Alright,
the
I'm-
town-based code of
Dennis,
conduct
thank you
is
so much.
that these
Oh, my
wetlands
water
fall
bowl's
to the
here.
wayside. You're welcome.
Okay. Right up to,
Thank you.
so it's tomorrow, because I didn't,
We can speak to it today.